It was when the towers came down. I felt I had an obligation, and I wasn't going to let other people go in my place. When I worked up at the front gate as a designated marksman, we would have people from the local towns walk up and be like, hey, this guy came up to me in the middle of the night and offered me the equivalent of 10,000 cash here in the U.S. to go plant IEDs on this route. What do you want me to do with the IEDs? And there was one time where I searched a guy and I lifted his shirt up and he had a map of the base drawn on his belly.
In Sharpie?
Yeah.
Like on his...
Yes. It's interesting because a lot of the problems like hypervigilance and all these things are assets when you're over there. Now, part of the problem is we treat mental injuries and physical injuries different. If you have a physical injury, you get a Purple Heart, you're treated as a hero, everything. You have a mental injury, you're just crazy. I knew death would stop it, and I figured if I'm going to go out, I'm going to send a message.
What's cooking, everybody? I am joined in the bunker today by Jon Lubecky. And if you heard that intro snippet right there, yes, Jon is a veteran who happened to serve both in the Marines as well as in the Army, pre and post 9/11. And you will hear all about that today. His story of his deployments and also his story of what happened when he came back. So Jon was recently featured in yet another documentary. He's been in several, but the most recent was Michael Pollan's 4-part docuseries on Netflix called How to Change Your Mind. It's an excellent series. It's based on a book of the same name that Michael Pollan wrote, and I'd highly recommend it. But Jon was featured in episode 3 because he was able to cure his severe PTSD through MDMA therapy, obviously done in a fully professional study here in the United States, and he's been an advocate for it down in Washington, D.C., working with both parties since. So we talked all about that today. Again, we got through his whole story as well. We had a lot of good conversations in there and little debates about hot button issues too. So this was a very full podcast, and I really, really appreciate Jon doing it, and I hope you guys are going to enjoy. Now, as always, hit that link in my description for the 8 Sleep Pod Pro cover, not just for me and to support the show, but for yourself so that you can sleep better than ever before. The 8 Sleep Pod Pro cover comes in queen or king sizes. It goes right on top of your current mattress, and you are going to have a seamless sleep because the 8 Sleep app is going to work throughout the night and make sure that you get the deepest sleep possible. So if you use the code TRENDIFIER at checkout, that's TRENDIFIER, you will get $150 off your own 8 Sleep Pod Pro cover today. So hit that link and check it out. If you're on YouTube right now, please hit that subscribe button. Please hit that like button on the video. And as always, would love to hear from you down in the comment section below. To everyone who's been sharing around the episodes, thank you. Let's keep that rolling. To everybody who is on Apple or Spotify right now, thank you for checking out the show over there. If you haven't already, be sure to leave a 5-star review on either one of those platforms. And I look forward to seeing you guys again for future episodes. That said, you know what it is. I'm Julian Dorey. This is Trendifier. And please welcome Jon Lubecky.
Getting passed by, in 2 tractor trailers who take 20 miles to pass each other 10 miles below speed limit, it just backs everything up. And
that wouldn't go in Jersey. I don't think we'd let that happen around here. We're a little crazy driving. But when did you, what was your full timeline here? Because the stuff we're going to end up getting to is basically the psychedelic research you were involved in early on, where you were a participant as well, and now you work in that and have been doing this for years, which is really, really cool. But when, in relation to that, which I think started in 2014, when were you deployed? When did you go into the Army, and what was your full background there?
So I will say the research has been going on for decades. I became involved in the research in 2014. So I don't want people to think that, 2014 is when all this started, because there's been a lot of people who've been working for a very long time to get it where it is. So I grew up in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. I knew college really wasn't for me when I graduated. So I joined the Marine Corps Delayed Entry Program right after my junior year, shipped for boot camp 9 days after I graduated from high school, went down to not Charleston, South Carolina, which I love and lived in for about a decade, but Parris Island, South Carolina. 4 years in the Marine Corps, had a blast. I was a loadmaster on C-130s and C-9s, flew around the world, lived in Japan for a year. That was my 18 to 22. I didn't go to college, and I'm glad that I did that, not just because of the service, but traveling the world, seeing and interacting with different cultures and I lived in Japan for a year. I don't speak Japanese. I know what it feels like,
Yeah.
To live in a country where you can't speak the language.
What's the name of the base out there again?
Well, the base I was actually on was Marine Corps Air Station Futema on Okinawa, but that base has since closed, and they moved all the C-130s up to Misawa, somewhere on mainland Japan.
What were you doing over there? What was your job?
To load and unload the airplane and fly wherever it went. That's the short version. You do airdrops, which I actually never got to do airdrops. But C-130 crew, back then we were on F&R models, which is an older aircraft. I never flew on a military aircraft until actually very recently that was actually younger than me.
It's not reassuring.
Yeah. I mean, the C-130s that I flew on in the late 90s, were landing at Khe Sanh in Vietnam. And you could see where there were like patches from different holes and stuff.
We do have a lot of new shit though, too. Right?
Oh,
yeah.
So in fairness,
sure.
Yeah, no. This was 95 to 99. So in fairness to the Marine Corps, they actually got the C-130s first, which was a giant shock to everyone in the Marine C-130 community. So they've all been upgraded to J models. As a matter of fact, one of the last F and R models was Fat Albert with the Blue Angels down in Pensacola. They just got delivery of their brand new J model, and they're running it through its paces down there. And I'm pretty sure it'll join the air show circuit here pretty soon. But that allowed me to do that. And, when you're gone as much as you are as an air crewman, being in a relationship doesn't really work too well. When I was in, the divorce rate for my MOS was like 300%, meaning everybody's on their third or fourth marriage and things like this. So I met a girl and was stupid and
didn't take the warnings.
No, she was really fantastic. It's just, to be honest, when I deployed, she couldn't really handle that. So
it's hard.
It is. Especially, there was a lot of other factors. She was actually going through nursing school at the time, and a lot of the people she was hanging out with were former military spouses. And so she thought I was cheating with people back in the United States while I was in Iraq, which was kind of weird, but everybody in her nursing class was like, yeah, my husband cheated on me when he went to Iraq. So 2 weeks before I came back from Iraq, she left. And
Yikes.
I came home. No one met the airplane. Watched everyone in my unit go to somebody. Actually, I'll never forget. I walked out into the rain, flipped open my cell phone, and called Sprint at the time, and turned my cell phone back on because it'd been off for a year.
Yeah.
Tried to call her, couldn't find her. Took a taxi to my house. Found out my house was empty. My dog was gone. My motorcycle was gone.
Oh, you didn't even know.
No idea. So
wow.
I came home to a country song, which also didn't help my mental health.
I'll bet.
But that's kind of going fast forward. So I got out of the Marines, and I worked in logistics. Really loved it. Kind of had a knack for it. Worked for a utility for a long time and worked for a manufacturing company. And I enjoyed logistics because I like to solve problems. And so 4 years go by, and I watch 9/11, as many did. I knew entirely on 9/11 I was going back in because I knew it was going to happen. I went and I had a blast for 4 years, and I got to travel the world on the government's dime. They trained me to do a lot of different things.
And that was 95. Just want to
95 to 99
Right.
I was in the Marines. And then so
now you're working in logistics and 9/11 happens. Now
Right.
I'm on track. Gotcha.
that was a really, really interesting day because I had started that job 2 weeks earlier, and I was running all commercial transportation for a major utility company in the Southeast
Oh, wow.
that had, things like 4 nuclear power plants.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because, I had just recently gotten out of the Marine Corps. And the guy I was with he was a logistics guy, just complete civilian. He happened to be from Cleveland too. Good guy. And, he comes up and he goes, man, you got to come to the conference room and see what's going on. I'm like, why? And he goes, plane hit the World Trade Center. Now, me being an aviation guy, my brain goes back to during World War II, a small fighter hit the Empire State Building.
Yes.
So my thought when he first said that was some sightseeing like Cessna or something like that got lost in the clouds, because I'd flown into New York Center when I was in the Marine Corps. So like I'd seen the World Trade Center poking up through the clouds, and I'm like, okay, sightseeing plane got lost in the clouds and hit the building. That sucks, but I got work to do.
Did you still think that when you saw the size of the hole, though? Well, like once you took a good look?
So yeah, and I'm getting to that. So so then he comes back and he's like, no, dude, seriously, you got to see this. I'm like, all right, fine. I figure I'm gonna go say, yeah, it's exactly what I thought, and I'll go back to my desk. But hey, you know, back before COVID, when we had to go to the office, there was lots of stuff we would do at the office just because it was easier to go do X than to like argue it. I walked in right as the second plane hit.
Oh, geez.
And right then I knew exactly what was going on. Because I was in aviation, I had a very, very strong idea of what the reaction was going to be. One of which is they were going to ground every aircraft in the United States. And the only aircraft flying would be military. And that is exactly what they did very rapidly. But because of that, I'm like, I run logistics. A lot of our stuff goes on airplanes. I have 4 high security nuclear plants that have shipments scheduled all day. All of this, go back to my desk, immediately sit down, take a second, formulate a plan, put it into action. I halted all shipments to all the nuclear power plants, 100%. Complete lockdown, had everything held at the docks.
As people forget, that day when that was going on, everyone thought something was just going to blow up to their left. It was crazy.
And your nuclear security, and you've got a dude in an Old Dominion, LTL truck delivering a skid who sneezes wrong. That can go bad for everybody. So by removing that pressure, it allowed security to focus on what they needed to and focus on the people that had to go in. Because I called up and I'm like, you tell me anything that has to be delivered today or the shit shuts down. And they're like, nothing. I'm like, cool, done. I was fortunate to be able to pull all the paychecks for Florida, because this is back before everybody had to deposit. Show my age here a bit. And, they was able to pull those off of FedEx and put them in a cargo van and drove them down to the the corporate, Florida corporate office, so that everyone in Florida could get paid.
Wow. Because
that was a Thursday. Friday's a payday.
Well, it got hit on a Tuesday,
or
right?
a Tuesday.
Yeah.
It was the next day. Payday was within a day or two. Now, about half of those were just pay stubs because of direct deposit, but there were a lot of people who had hard checks.
Yeah. This is 01 for sure.
And it's kind of funny. People today don't realize what it was like to not have any planes flying for a week.
Yeah, was it a full 7 days that they grounded everything?
It was a lengthy amount of time. And everything ground to a halt.
Some of the, I guess, FAA guys will talk about seeing the radar just go silent and just sitting there. Like when you see some of these interviews where they're remembering that day and then the days after it and seeing almost like a dead heartbeat monitor when they're so used to seeing spec. And it's just it really brought it home for them, because when it was first happening and they were just getting everyone on the ground, I was like, all right, just get everything on the ground. And then you're like, oh my God, this.
Yeah, air traffic control. If you've ever been in a tower or, been fortunate enough to see one of the centers like New York Center, those guys, they show up, they sit down, and boom, it's constant chaos to keep all these planes flying, keep everything, because you've got planes crisscrossing each other and a couple thousand feet apart, and you got to make sure they don't slam into each other and all these things. It's controlled chaos, and it's just constant. And then to sit there with nothing to do, just sit and watching that, especially when if you see a blink,
problem,
that could mean another building comes down. Right. That could mean God knows what. And I that was an interesting day for America, and we can discuss everything that happened after that. But that was a day we all came together.
Yes.
I'll never forget seeing the entire House of Representatives sitting on the steps of the Capitol singing "God Bless America."
Yeah.
I doubt that would happen today.
It's very sad that you say that, but I am closer to agreeing with you than disagreeing with you. I don't think we could know until, God forbid, something like that happened, and I hope it doesn't, obviously. But
I also think there's a lot of stories from that day that show our better angels.
Yes.
Guy I graduated from high school with was in one of the towers, Dan Swingos. He, played football in high school, played football for Princeton. And on 9/11, he literally picked up two people and carried them like a football and ran away. I'm sure you remember the stories of airplanes that they allowed to take off with military escort because of organ transplants.
Wait, I haven't heard those stories.
Oh yeah,
I always learn something. There's always something new. With
there was a flight or two like the day after or the day of, and it was a situation of this is a heart. Somebody has tragically died. If this doesn't get to this person, that person also dies, and they made a call. Now, I guarantee you those pilots got looked into. They had a military escort.
Yeah.
All these other things. But that actual permission came from the president because that was the only person who could give that order.
Wow. I never knew that. But, yeah, I mean, there's things. You think about everything we do with planes, to say nothing of regular supply chains and day-to-day. I mean, something bad like that happens, okay, it's got to shut down for a few days. We saw what happened with COVID, even not with planes, but you know what I mean. But, like, there are life and death situations that rely on planes all the time that we just don't think about. And I've never heard that. I'm going to look into that after this, see those stories up close. That's so cool.
But so that was my 9/11.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I also I worked in a high rise in downtown Raleigh, and they came across the speakers and they said, we're in a high rise. This is a potential target. If you don't feel comfortable, go home. Then I got a tap on my shoulder, and they're like, "You're critical personnel. You're dead." I'm like, "That's cool." And it's funny because my dad, he actually worked for the power company his whole career, and he was critical personnel because he was one of his jobs along the way was he was the guy who sat there doing dispatch, which is making sure that like the electricity goes where it needs to be, and there's not too much electricity or not enough, so you don't have brownouts or blow up transformers. So you literally have to have somebody there the whole time. They would get bomb threats. And he would tell me he'd be sitting there, and they'd come up and they're like, "You're critical personnel. Everyone else evacuate the building.
You're here to die."
and like cops come in with bomb sniffing dogs, and they're like,
"It's just working."
Well, the first place he did say, in fairness, the first place they always checked was under my desk. I'm like, well, okay, they cleared your area and then went out, did it the rest of the time. But it was kind of funny, and hurricanes, ice storms, same way. But because of 9/11, I knew I was going back in. So as a loadmaster, I looked at, being a loadmaster for the Marines again. And
what part was that? So I just want to make sure I understand this, though, because when it happened, you had to think about your job first and what you actually had to be responsible for, as you described. But, like, at the same moment, did you already know that? Like, okay, I'm going to take care of this, and then I'm going over there and fighting whatever this is? Or was that later that day when you had a chance to take a breath?
It was when the towers came down. When it wasn't two towers with a giant smoking hole, but when both towers collapsed. I knew right then. Because I knew my country was going to war. And, I didn't have kids at the time. And, I had a wife, but also, I had been trained. I had a lot of fun. The government spent probably $1 million to train me. I felt I had an obligation. And I wasn't going to let other people go in my place. So I looked at the Marines, and they only have 2 reserve C-130 units because the work I was doing with the utility and working with access control procedures and things like that was also important work, was in Texas and New York. Well, I lived in North Carolina, and that's kind of a hike. So I actually started looking at the Army and the Army National Guard because they had a thing called warrant officer pilots. Where you don't have to go to college, but you still get to go to flight school. And I'd always wanted to do that, which is why I was air crew, but I couldn't because I had, crappy eyes. Well, then they had this cool thing called laser eye surgery, and the Army started an investigational trial to determine if warrant officer or if pilots could undergo, helicopter pilots specifically, could undergo LASIK eye surgery, in part because most of the issues with LASIK eye surgery in aviation have to do with emergency decompression at a high altitude.
What does that mean?
Which part?
Emergency decompression at a high altitude.
So so if you're on an airplane and it's at 36,000 feet and you have an emergency decompression, meaning either something goes wrong with the airplane that causes a giant hole, like a window blows out, or there's also emergency procedures, for example, smoke and fumes, fires, things like that, where there's a little handle in the cockpit, they pull it and it blows this round thing that decompresses the aircraft immediately. And there's very valid reasons, in emergency procedures for this. The issue becomes if you have LASIK eye surgery with a corneal flap cut and there's an emergency decompression, there's a risk that corneal flap will pop open. And then you have a blind pilot. Not a good thing.
Holy shit.
Helicopters aren't pressurized. Therefore, it's not an issue. So, and I actually don't have a corneal flap cut. I got LASEK, LASEK versus IK, slightly different procedure. Doesn't have any of those issues. But I qualified and started going, enlisted in the Army and started going through warrant officer selection. And they trained me to be a MLRS fire direction specialist.
Wow. So you were a Marine. You were in the Marines and in the Army.
Yes.
You don't hear that very often.
No.
That's because when you threw me off earlier for a second, you're like, I became a Marine. I'm like, wait, you were in the Army. So I was wondering how that was going to happen. But this was all because of the opportunity, basically, to be able to fly.
Right. And so learned a lot about artillery, did a bunch of cool stuff there, and then got put on alert to go to Iraq.
Here's a question. When did you officially enlist? Like, how long after September 11th did all this get sorted out? And
3 days after the initial invasion in Iraq.
Okay, so then they
March
put you
of
in.
2003.
They put you in to get the LASIK.
No. So part of the deal with the trial was I paid out of my own pocket for the eye surgery.
So you did that after September 11th, though.
Yes.
And then you went in, trained all this stuff, and then we're in what, like 03, 04, and now Iraq's going on?
Yeah. So I raised my right hand 3 days after the initial invasion in Iraq. Not because of the invasion in Iraq. That's just when it was scheduled. And so, initially went to MOS school down at Fort Bragg to learn how to do MLRS stuff, multiple launch rockets. You may have seen those on the news. They're kind of a big deal over in Ukraine right now. Was assigned a unit, started doing the physicals and had to take the AFQT test and do all the stuff for selection and go to boards. And then I found out right after I got put on alert, which was like January of 2005, is when I, 3 days after, I get notified that, hey, I'm selected, but I'm on alert. So I'm like, okay, does this mean I go to Fort Rucker or Iraq? Because those are two very different things. Right. And they had a shortage of pilots at the time. So I legitimately didn't know, are they going to send me to flight school and then send me to Iraq, or are they just going to send me to Iraq? I was kind of hoping for the flight school part, but, hey. So they're like, nah, you'll just go to Rucker when you get back. I'm like, all right, cool. So we go up to Camp Atterbury, Indiana for 3 months of training. Had a head injury there, actually.
How'd you do that?
So we were out in the FOB. It's a forward operating base, so it's a field exercise. And they were simulating an attack. And I was running to go do what I was supposed to do, which was to set up security around a transformer and stuff so it didn't get attacked. And yeah, I tripped on a tent wire.
Oh, yikes.
But so you've seen the NVG mounts on the front of the helmets, right?
Night
vision goggles.
Oh, yeah, yes.
So it's a mount that just mounts on the helmet, and then NVG goggles just click on, right? So there's this little metal thing that comes down, goes in, up, and back to hold it against the helmet, the front ridge of the helmet. Well, when you trip and bang your head on the front, those two prongs go right into your head. So so I got a concussion there. That was my first TBI.
Yikes.
And then we flew over to Kuwait, spent about a month in Kuwait doing additional training, and then went in country. Bravo Battery, 5th and 113th Field Artillery was my unit. We fell under 548th Logistics Task Force with the 10th Mountain. And
where were you stationed in Iraq?
Based out of Balad.
Balad. All right, I'll pull up the map. Keep going.
LSA Anaconda, smack dab in the center of the Sunni Triangle, probably about 45, 50 clicks northwest of Baghdad, if memory serves.
Got it. I'm just zooming out right now. It'll be in the corner of the screen for people, too, to look at.
So it had a fun nickname called Mortaritaville.
Mortaritaville.
Oh, yeah, and if you want to laugh hysterically, go on YouTube.
By the way.
Yeah, there was, if you go on YouTube... and just Google or go on YouTube and do a search for Mortaritaville. They took the Jimmy Buffett song Margaritaville.
Oh no!
Yes. Oh, and they are so funny. When you got here's the thing, it's really funny because there's a joke that goes around every time a new Call of Duty comes out that this is going to be Call of Duty True Army, which means. You get woken up in the middle of the night to play most of the action in the game over 15 minutes, and then you spend a month twiddling your thumbs and burning diesel fuel and shit and things like that. Yeah. There's a lot of sitting around. You get bored, and you're also in a high stress environment. General Order 1 says, no sex, no drugs, no alcohol, no porn,
no sex,
no nothing. Yes, unless you're married. And your spouse is deployed with you.
What? This is a thing?
Yeah, go read General Order 1 in Iraq. And here's
sounds like prison.
Well, and here's the crazy part. They wonder why people come back with problems. You take 18 to 22-year-old kids, which is most of the people. Granted, I was 29 when I deployed, and you're like, hey, we're going to take every vice and every way of blowing off steam away from you and hand you a loaded rifle and go tell you to go kill the bad guys. And they wonder why they come back with problems. There's processing that needs to go on. And, you see these old World War II movies and, the squad gets together and, oh, hey, we found a bottle of whiskey, or we found a bottle of gin. And they all, have a couple of drinks and they talk and you know what? That's group therapy.
When done correctly, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's processing. They're bullshitting. It's their friends. And that's a good thing. But there was nothing like that. I did find it funny because the Aussies were like, hey, we'll be part of your coalition, but we're going to drink beer and look at porn. So there's there's an Aussie compound and they had all the beer and their computers weren't locked out and things like that. But also that meant the Army could just mess with people over stupid things. And this is where you got to see the good leaders and the bad leaders. Hey, if they find a DVD, because this is again 0506, it's before you could whip out a phone.
You have the portable DVD players.
One of the major issues about the coming back is everything's bootlegged. Literally, everybody had, and it's funny because you can't bring it home, so everybody just shares stuff. So we had the entire Hollywood library bootlegged, somewhere on base. If you wanted to see a movie, you could probably go, just go get it. And it's pretty funny.
Was this the good bootleg where they actually had the file, or was it the one where the dude's holding the camera up to the screen in the movie theater and it's shaking?
It entirely depends on which one and who did it. Sometimes, it's totally a dude holding up something in a movie theater, and sometimes it's oh wow, they got the actual digital rip off of this. And it's funny because the DVDs were obviously done in a burner and they'd have stickers, but the label would be just a scan of the original DVD. But so you can't bring those back, but everybody had all these stacks of DVDs and there was porn DVDs and stuff like that. And when the commander comes in and he sees that, technically he's supposed to bust you. And I know people who got in trouble for that. In other units, my commander realized that there's bigger fish to fry.
Good for him.
But also alcohol's an issue. Like, to be honest, you know, my commander, my battery commander, you know, I especially as I've gotten older, he was in a really tough position, and I don't envy it. But you know, I honestly, genuinely don't think he would have cared if anybody had a beer. But you know, we did have some people who got a hold of a bottle of alcohol and got drunk and then locked and loaded on people, and that's part of the reason some of these rules,
yeah.
you know, and there's a lot of crazy stuff that goes on over there because, I mean, it's all high stress. You know, there's a reason my base was called Mortaritaville.
How many people were on the base? I don't know if you said that. Roughly, ballpark.
Probably, I'd say less than 5,000, but I could be completely wrong.
And how big was the base?
So it used to be the former Air Force Academy for Iraq. So do you remember when they found the MiGs buried in the sand?
No.
Oh, that was like '04. Apparently Saddam Hussein buried all his MiGs in the sand so he could dig them up when we left. We found them.
Go figure.
Yeah. Didn't find nuclear weapons, but we found the MiGs he buried. And so, but it, I mean, you could probably look at Wikipedia. Part of it is how many people were on that base depends on what year it was. And I don't remember, but it was, I mean, it was a lot because, so you had the theater hospital. It was one of the major installations that wasn't in the green zone.
And the green zone covered
Baghdad.
It was just Baghdad.
And it was actually only certain sections of Baghdad. And the reason it was called the green zone is because there was also a red zone, which is where it wasn't safe.
Right.
But no, my base got mortared like 6,000 times with mortars and rockets and all of that stuff. And this is where it gets interesting when you start dealing with PTSD, because there's people who I've talked to who worked in finance or supply and literally never left base.
But they're getting mortared every day.
Yeah, it's literally raining bombs every day.
So what would they? Who was dropping the bombs? Like Al-Zarqawi's guys?
Yeah, the insurgency.
Right. So they're just dropping. I mean, were people dying left and right too? Was they dropping bombs on it, or?
A lot of injuries from shrapnel and things like that. Anywhere from, you know, a couple of stitches or something like that, or just TBIs. To there were fatalities and casualties.
I was going to say, you're sitting ducks.
It's mortars and rockets. And it was interesting because for part of my time there, I worked with local nationals and Iraqis who would come on base.
Right.
You know, there is definitely a winning hearts and mind aspect to it.
Were you working with Shiites in this case?
I never asked, actually, whether they were Shia or Sunni. I did, you know, we did talk about, you know, various. You know, I asked a lot of questions because I'm a curious, curious person. And I did a personal security detail on a low-ranking Iraqi general, and we were just talking, and it was funny because he said something. He's like, you know, it's funny, you Americans, you make fun of people in the Middle East because we have multiple wives. And I'm like, okay, this will be an interesting conversation. And and he goes, one, we don't all have multiple wives. He's like, I have a hard enough time with just one. And he goes, but here's the thing. We do the same thing. It's our wealthy, it's our elite. They do the same thing as your wealthy and elite.
They just are public about it.
They're just public about it. Yeah. Instead of having a girlfriend in an apartment in LA while they live in New York with their wife and kids, the wife has to approve and be okay with it. And all the women have to be treated equally. So if you want to get a second wife, you can't knock down, you know, the standard of living of the first wife or anything like this. He's like, it's the same thing. It's just above board. And, you know, I remember that because it kind of reframed how I looked at a lot of things over there. I'm really glad I worked with local nationals. They were really good people, and they're also really bad people. And
sure.
You know, because there's one time, so part of it is to make sure, you know, you've got two guys and you've got anywhere from 10 to 25 Iraqis. And they do all sorts of odd jobs, you know, dig ditches, paint buildings, pick up trash, whatever. And they got paid in US dollars every week. I forget. It was like $30 a day or something like that.
Did you ever accidentally get someone like undercover insurgent in those jobs?
No, it wasn't accidental. I followed procedure. And one of the issues is like Americans would go over there and they're like, oh, I hate doing local national duty. They're you know, these Iraqis are all dirty, they smell, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and they're like, I don't want to touch them. I'm like, I don't care, because like, you've got to search these guys coming in, you've got to search these guys going out, because this was also after the bombing at the Chow Hall in Mosul, where a guy walked in with a backpack and a bomb and things like that.
So there's an example.
And there was one time where I searched a guy and I lifted his shirt up and he had a map of the base drawn on his belly. Which
like in Sharpie?
Yeah.
Like on his...
Yes. And that would then, and the entire purpose of that was to give that information to the insurgents so they knew where to target.
Wait, so he was going... Oh, he was on his way out.
Yes.
Got it.
So he'd come on base to work that day and paste things off, and which is also something you're supposed to watch for as an LN guard, is watching people who are like taking notes and lifting their shirt up with a Sharpie and drawing on it with a Sharpie. How that got missed, I don't know, but yeah. And so yeah,
So what'd you do?
Oh no, he got zip tied, and we made a phone and we made a phone call, and some people came and picked him up. But when I worked up at the front gate as a designated marksman, we would have people from the local towns walk up and be like, "Hey, this guy came up to me in the middle of the night and offered me the equivalent of 10,000 cash here in the U.S. to go plant IEDs on this route. What do you want me to do with the IEDs?" This is somebody who would be like somebody coming up to any like Amazon worker and saying, "Hey, I'm going to give you 10 grand. All you got to do is go plant 3 bombs. And if you don't, I'm going to come back tomorrow and I'm going to kill you and your entire family."
Jesus Christ.
So,
and they would come to you and tell you this, though.
They'd come to the front gate. They'd just come to the base. It wasn't like they knew me and they were like, "Hey, I want to help John." It was, they thought it was the right thing to do. But that's...
Did we protect people like that when they did that?
To the best of our ability.
Jesus. Wow. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the show, please be sure to share it around with your friends. Spreading the word about what we do here is the best possible help we can get to grow this thing and to continue to get great guests like this. So thank you to all of you who have been sharing the links to these episodes each week, and thank you to all of you who are going to do it now.
And it's definitely interesting. And, I question, living here in America, how many people would do that?
Fair question.
And how many people go along to get along? How many people would put not only themselves, a lot of people are very willing to put themselves in jeopardy to do the right thing. Putting you and your family and your kids, your parents.
It's a question you could ask, in all fairness here. You could ask this question of anywhere. Yeah. You happen to be in the war zone where these people were forced to face that, and you got to see the ones who did it. You also didn't get to see the ones who didn't. You know, I think, thinking about this a little more, I think it'd probably be a mixed bag like that. You'd have the people who would do it, and you have the people who wouldn't. But,
well, and realize that this was, it happened, but it also wasn't like all day, every day, people coming up like that. It was a once in a blue moon thing, but it always impressed me when people did that. I had other really great experiences over there. Like I was there for the first free and fair election that they had ever experienced.
It was like 2006,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And so when you're on towers, there was 2 fence lines, and then there was a canal. And we were cleared to shoot if anybody crossed the canal. And we had people going into the canal to show us their purple finger that they voted. Which is why, I came back October 26, 2006. There was a big midterm election, November. I walked in. I wrote in a bunch of guys I served with for every office because I didn't know who any of these people were. I hadn't been able to.
Yeah.
Like, I was always a person who liked politics, and my vote mattered a lot to me. So I'd do research and figure out who I wanted to vote. So what I did was I wrote in people's names, and then for issue items I just voted no, because no was don't change anything, status quo. But I still showed up and voted.
Right.
It's kind of funny how many people go on Twitter and Facebook and gripe and all this stuff, but they don't go to the polls and vote. That's why every election day, I put out a thing about voting. I don't care who you vote for. You want to vote Green Party, you want to vote Libertarian, you want to vote Republican, you want to vote Democrat, cool. That's your choice, your vote. But you still should show up.
Yeah, I think people, it depends how they have their voice heard. If they are someone who, like you wrote in a bunch of people, right? And you just come back from the military, you've seen up close how much people will literally like give their life to want to be able to vote and have a fair system, or what could appear to be a fair system. But then there are a lot of people who want their voice heard by not sharing it, because they look at this country and they see two crazy parties. We all do know, just like you knew when you wrote in those guys like they weren't going to win. We do know no third party is going to win. The only thing it's going to do is maybe fuck it up for one of the parties, whoever it may be that year. And there are people out there who are very, very upset with the process. And it's something, by the way, that I struggle with, because I can't stand the two parties either. And it's like, well, if I go in there, should I just be writing people in, and then some poll worker has to take 2 minutes of their time to write out all these people and keep the record of stuff that has no chance? And, they're human beings and they're working. It's a fair question for some people to ask. Where I agree with you, though, is the people who go on there and just fucking complain about every fucking person to come in there left and right over and over and over again, and then never actually do anything about it, or never stand up, or maybe even pick out a third party just to let their voice be heard if they're that passionate about it in that way. If they're doing that over a long time, I agree that's probably not the way to go.
And this is where I tell everyone who says, I'm going to protest by not voting. One, I really have an issue when people say, my protest is not doing something that's a little bit inconvenient. Like, I would rather somebody show up at the poll and write in somebody's name. I wish, look at the past election. What was it? 65% turnout, something like that. Maybe even as high as 70. One of the highest election turnout rates we
sounds about right.
Yeah, we've ever seen. 30% of people didn't show up. Can you imagine if 30% of people in America walked in and wrote in none of the above? And because if there was an election, and they said, okay, candidate red won House District 3 with 40% of the vote. Candidate blue lost. He got 39% of the vote, and 21% said none of the above. If you put none of the above on the ballot, do you know how many? It'd be interesting how many elections none of the above would win.
That should be a good movement to start, because right now that would never happen. People would write someone in, or they wouldn't vote, or something like that. Looking at it from a utopian type view, yeah, that would be really powerful. But and this is my issue too. Like, just talking to. But
you got to show up. You got to show up and do the work. And this is one of the things that frustrates me the most in politics and working in psychedelics and all of this is, it's really easy to say something and be seen saying something. It's a lot different to actually go do the work. And this is where, the people who rail on Facebook but don't show up and vote, even if it's to write somebody in or write in none of the above or what have you.
That's not a lot of work, though. That's like, you keep calling it work. That's like no
exactly.
work. I never thought of it that way.
Well, but okay, in fairness, voting is, it's on Tuesday. Like, if people got to work, then they got to figure out, like, it's not a lot of work. You're right. But, you got to go do something. And, and even nothing. That is too much to ask. There's a lot of people who all they do is talk. And that's because it's about being seen saying something, especially by their friends and their peer group and their tribe. And then they let other people go do the hard work. And it's so funny when I hear people talk, say, oh, well, I manifested it by tweeting it. And then it happened. So it happened because I did it. No, that's not how this works.
Yeah, I got you there. Yeah. No, it's and again, like, you're seeing it up close, and this is the part that I've had struggles with in the past with the whole voting thing. It's like, there are other places that would kill to be able to have that vote. Would kill to be able to do it.
Let's go with this. There are literally places on this planet right now where people are being murdered assassinated.
Yes.
And wars are being fought simply for the right to have a vote.
Right. There's a lot of that. And so I do try to balance that with how I look at it, you know. But whenever I talk with military, like I remember talking to my grandpa about this, who served and stuff, I respect that opinion a lot. I voted in every election in my life. I did not vote in the 2020 election, and that was by choice. That was a
I wrote in
conscious
Rick
choice
Doblin for president and Chris Lotlicker for vice president.
We'll talk about Rick today. We'll talk about Rick.
But also, it's kind of interesting. I think a lot of it also has to do with where you live. You know, I know a lot of Democrats, a lot of people on the left who say, I'm not a Democrat, but I am on the left, who lived in California, and they absolutely voted for Joe Biden.
Yeah.
If Donald Trump won California, he would have won all 50 states because the whole rest of the country would have been that way. They were in a position where they knew California would overwhelmingly, and it did, like 65%, something like that.
Yeah.
In D.C., 92% for Biden. So if you didn't like him, you could. Like, I didn't have, like, it didn't matter. I lived in I voted in South Carolina. I knew who was going to win South Carolina. If South Carolina went to Biden, then Biden won all 50 states. So I got to write in, and I didn't have to worry, if my vote was going to be the deciding vote between, Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
I see what you're saying now. Okay, I wasn't following that for a second.
If you're in Ohio or you're in Pennsylvania or you're in Wisconsin or Arizona, one of these swing states, it's a different story.
It feels different. I voted in Pennsylvania when I was in college. Like that vote felt different because I'm like, wait, this. I
used to
really
vote in
matters.
Ohio, and Ohio's always been a swing state, But if I'm not in a swing state, especially, I'm gonna do what I want because that sends a message too. My thing is, if you want to protest, cast a protest vote. Don't not vote.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I know I'm going to be voting in the next election. This was a little bit of a bridge too far, and I did also look at it like this is going to be a clusterfuck of an election because it's mid-pandemic and everything, and I didn't want to write in people.
Yeah, and let's be honest, how representative are two 80-year-olds?
Not at all, and that's the other thing. It's like just that alone. It's like
you have an 80-year-old billionaire and you have an 80-year-old career politician.
It's nuts.
Neither one of them could probably tell you the price of milk. That's
a good way to put it.
And this is our representation, This is, but also I'll tell you, it's kind of funny when you actually sit down and you get to meet and talk with these people. And this is one of the things. We need to stop this tribalism. And this is one of the things I hope psychedelics will accomplish in the long run is we just need to sit down and talk.
Yeah.
And not believe that if you disagree with me, you are either A, inherently stupid, or B, inherently evil. Because guess what? That's how both sides look at all of this.
You haven't been on Twitter enough.
No, but it's funny. I'm a guy, and right now, I'll be honest, I'm fairly politically agnostic. When you do the work that I do, and you work with both parties, you see good in both parties. You also see the complete bullshit in both parties and the games that they play. And so there's things where I'm very much to agree with the right and things I very much agree with the left, and that's the majority of America.
Yes.
And this fighting over it instead of just sitting down and talking. You go back to the 50s. And, a lot of the politics wasn't, should we do this or, should people suffer or not? Should we do no, it was, this is our problem. We need to work together to solve it. Now, the different parties had different ideas on how to solve it. And a lot of it was, hey, we should spend $10 million because that's what it's going to cost. And some people are like, well, let's just give it $20 million. Things like that. Those are absolutely policy discussions to have. But the other thing you had was, politics ended at the country's shores. Foreign policy was the domain of the president, and there was not a lot of dissent, shall I say. It wasn't, hey, the midterms are coming up and we can say this. And yeah, it might damage our reputation with a whole bunch of allies and potentially cause World War III, but there's elections to win.
Huh. I never made that. I mean, I wasn't alive, but from what I've seen, I never made that distinction. But it's a really relevant, little silo to go into, because I was listening to a podcast, I don't know, a few months ago, but it was an older podcast. My friend Danny did it with this reporter from the New York Times who broke the whole MK Ultra thing back in the day.
Yep.
And he talked about having a beer with Jimmy Carter after he left office down in South America, because he was covering the South American unit for the New York Times at the time. Carter was down there. They knew each other, so they sit down. And it was a few years after, and he was saying, now that you're removed, what are your thoughts on the whole thing? How much can a president really do? What do you think of the office, all that? And Carter said, when I got into office, I called every living former president, and I just invited them in to get advice, as he should. I thought that was a great idea. And he said, the one who was the most effective in giving me a realistic view on this was actually Nixon. And the guy listens okay, this is interesting. And he goes, so Nixon comes in and he says, all right, you got two sides of this whole job. You got domestic politics and you got foreign policy. Domestic politics, they're all going to fight with each other. Nothing really matters. You get one or two things done. Who the fuck cares? Let them all figure that out here. But foreign policy, you don't have to deal with Congress, and you can actually do some shit. And so thinking about the power that seat has when you're voting for the president, I do look at sometimes our arguments all coming on very important things, but healthcare and social politics and taxes and across the spectrum here. And then we're not thinking enough okay, well, how's this person going to deal with Saudi Arabia? How are they going to deal with Russia? Well, what's their thoughts on China? You get one or two hits on that, but a lot of it comes back to the whole domestic thing.
Well, going back to Nixon, and it's funny how often I talk about and use Nixon, given he resigned and Watergate and all that. But also, I'm from Cleveland, and where pollution was so bad, and we kept setting our river on fire so many times that Richard Nixon had to found the EPA. And most Republicans forget that Nixon created the EPA, and it was entirely because Cleveland kept setting its river on fire. But also Nixon went to China. And you look at how that was treated versus, say, by the media, by other politicians, etc., versus, say, Trump going to North Korea or Nancy Pelosi going to Taiwan. One of the things in the military that you deal with is there's a thing called a CODEL, CODEL, congressional delegation. Most of the ones I've seen have been very much bipartisan. And in part because that's the congressional oversight on foreign policy. They can go talk to Germany and be like, hey, all this stuff we gave you, you're actually using it for that. And you're like, there is a role for Congress, and congressional delegations are actually really good. And I think it allows for them to step out of that tribalism. Sadly, you've started seeing over the past 6 years a lot of non-bipartisan congressional delegations where it's all one party or it's all the other. And it's done for political reasons, and that's also what allows adversaries or people who have ill will towards the United States can influence what we do.
I agree it's bad, but how so, given it not being bipartisan versus being just parties? Can you explain that for people?
Yeah, I can give you a couple of really great examples.
Yeah, please.
So everybody thinks that Putin's a Republican and all this stuff. No, actually, you know what Putin's in it for? Putin.
Oh yeah.
If him, if you read the Senate report on interference in the 2020 election that he did, he had people, he just sowed discord.
Yes.
Because splitting apart the United States and sowing discord is in his interest. And we tend to look at our foreign policy in left versus right instead of what's in America's interest and the people that we're negotiating with, what's in their interest. Russia will always do what's in Russia's interest.
Sure.
And if that's helping Democrats, they will. If that's helping Republicans, they will. They don't care which party wins as long as Russia wins. You also have, swinging back into drug policy, fentanyl. We have a epidemic of fentanyl poisonings. All the fentanyl is coming from one location,
China.
And they're fighting the opium war in reverse. Because, see, here's the thing. These are fentanyl poisoning. Very few people go out and do fentanyl to do fentanyl. Most of the time, it's adulterated drugs sold on the black market. Like, nobody goes and buys meth or cocaine thinking there's fentanyl in it.
No. There was a book a few years ago, Fentanyl Inc., that this guy wrote by accident, if I remember correctly. He was like writing for something else. He was a culture reporter. I forget his name. I want to say it's Ben Westhoff. I hope I got that right. I'll check it in a minute. But he was doing some interview on something totally different, and the subject came up. And this is maybe like 2014, 2015. And he started asking whoever he was talking to about it. He was like, holy shit. And the dude, I mean, he was savage. He ended up deciding to go on his own undercover to China to see how easy, on like reporting for what would become this book, Fentanyl Inc., to see how easy it was to get fentanyl and how cheap it was. And some dude basically took him into a lab and he goes, all right, how much you want? He was like,
And nothing happens at that scale without the Chinese Communist Party knowing about it.
Of course. They're all over. Some guys I'm going to have in from VetPaul, which is a bunch of veterans who are doing amazing work protecting elephants and rhinos over in Africa. Most of the end result is coming from Chinese buyers, where publicly the government is saying no more ivory trade or no more whatever trade, and then privately they're a part of it. They're smuggling it out on planes as diplomats. It's crazy.
But realize the Chinese Communist Party, which currently has warships surrounding Taiwan as we speak, figured out that our war on drugs would allow them to wage war on the U.S. with drugs.
Yes, they did.
You know, it's interesting when you start looking at fentanyl as a global issue, because you can't. And here's why. EU has about half the population of the United States. We had, I believe it's 120,000 fentanyl deaths last year in the United States. So how many do you think the EU had?
I don't know.
10,000. The UK is a little less than a third the U.S. population. How many do you think they had?
Well, less than 10,000.
Roughly 2,000.
Yeah.
This is a very uniquely American issue. Canada does have an issue with this, same thing, but that's, in my belief, is because Canada's drugs come from the U.S. And so...
And Mexico's right there. They can smuggle it through the cartels, and they do.
But also a lot of the overdoses and deaths involving fentanyl in the UK actually stemmed from Americans bringing it into the UK. So, but you have 100. But let's compare that to 120,000 in the US. That's literally an opium war.
It is.
It's exactly what the British did to the Chinese, in the 1800s. They figured out they can sow chaos, tie up billions in resources, and cause chaos in a superpower by selling cheap fentanyl to the cartels. And it's interesting because nobody really, we talk about fentanyl, but we don't usually talk about China. If we're talking about fentanyl, it's about harm reduction or getting people who have abuse or addiction issues the help they need. I absolutely agree with those. Or it's about the border. Well, if you stop China sending it, then fentanyl is no longer an issue.
And the supply, even after COVID, the supply chain is so much tied through China and everything. So it's like there's all these potential outlets they can use to do things like
But
this.
they also got all the fentanyl and the analogs because we do most of our pharmaceutical manufacturing in China.
Yeah.
This is where there is real world implications of all of this. And this is where, most people who get addicted to opium, opiates and things like that, it's a manifestation of trauma. You know, they start taking it because they're legitimately in pain and they will do anything to make that pain go away for a little bit. Well, then it becomes uncontrollable. And this is where, you know, psychedelics, be it MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, ibogaine, you know, and now there's a whole bunch of stuff that's a bunch of numbers and letters that I can't even remember. But, you know, they don't heal your trauma. Psychedelics are a tool. And they're a tool that puts the mind, body, and spirit in the place it needs to be where the therapy can actually work. And this is where there's a difference between just going and doing drugs, you know, or doing psychedelics for a spiritual experience or to have fun or whatever. And I don't have a problem with that either. But if you're looking at healing trauma, this is where you need to do integration. You need to do the therapy aspect. Otherwise, it's just going and having fun. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you're seeing more and more people. I mean, Dan Bongino, like 3 days ago, posted on a big long video on Facebook saying he's considering taking psychedelics because
he needs them.
Well, yeah, but also, you know, he's a Secret Service agent.
Yeah.
He was in law enforcement his whole career. He said he suffers from depression.
That doesn't surprise me.
But, you know, they can help him. They can help lots of people. And, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that, like, you're going to become a peacenik hippie if you go do psychedelics. I mean, Tucker Max is a huge proponent of MDMA-assisted therapy.
Tucker Max.
I hope they serve beer in hell.
I'm not familiar with this.
Oh, wow.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Am I blanking right now?
Yeah. He's kind of the guy who started the whole blogging thing.
Tucker Max.
Yeah. He got
maybe, but I don't know.
No, he got in tons of trouble because he originally, like, his first book was basically about him going out and shenanigans and hooking up and all this stuff and getting drunk and all this stuff. And, you know, now he's married, has like 3 or 4 kids, something like that. And he said, you know, and it's true because, and I say it as well, you know, I've got a 19-year-old stepson, Joey Monteleone, great kid. And, you know, I know how shitty a father I was when I had PTSD. And I know how good a father I am now that I don't. And, you know, you have all these people coming out that you wouldn't expect. You know, if AOC came out and said, hey, I think psychedelics help with mental health, that's kind of one of the more AOC things you can say. Having Dan Crenshaw stand up on the House floor and give a 3-minute floor speech talking about how psychedelics can help veterans and others, you know, suffering from mental injuries, you know, that's a game changer. And one of the fears I have is we see how tribalistic we are. And there are people who want this to stay in the counterculture. They want this to be a left-wing thing. The problem, and it's frustrating because you can't get it done that way.
No.
You've got to have both sides. It's got to be bipartisan. And it's funny because I don't have to agree with everything they agree with. If they agree on this and they'll vote the right way, cool. Because it's still the right decision.
It's well said, man. I completely agree. But before we go to like where all the legislation stands, which is a very important part of this conversation, I do want to go through your full personal experience, which we've at least hinted at today. So we got off on some nice tangents there. But going back to Iraq, which is where immediately afterwards, as you had said at some point, you had some PTSD issues when you came back. You were on that base for a full year, and they were dropping mortars every day, and you at least were able to walk away without, you know, injuries or, you know, the worst
I still have
case.
a TBI.
You still have what?
Traumatic brain injury.
Right. Is that from practicing on the base, or did you also get some more there?
Yeah, that was so that was from Iraq, as well as all the joint damage that I have, 4 herniated discs in my back, knees are shot, all that. Now, some of that it's just being in the military.
Sure.
Some of that's being in Iraq, but no, I mean, I don't have a Purple Heart. I've got got all my limbs, all of that stuff. The TBI gets interesting. People think, you know, brain injury just makes you stupid. it actually affects a whole bunch of weird things.
Sure.
And this is where TBI and PTSD have a lot of overlapping symptoms. And so not having PTSD now, I know exactly which ones are TBI and which ones are PTSD. So for example, actually falling asleep is a TBI issue for me. Staying asleep was entirely a PTSD issue. And it has to do with the part of my brain that says, hey, dummy, you're hungry, go eat, or hey, dummy, you're tired, go to sleep, just is broken. It's one of the various weird parts of my brain that's just weirdly disconnected, along with giant gaps in memory. But, so I still do have that. But the PTSD is gone, and my PTSD became an issue right after I came home. Within 2 months, I had a suicide attempt.
Jesus.
Yeah.
So when you were there, though, I'm just trying to put myself, and I can't, but like doing my best to put myself in that kind of position. I'm just imagining, what did they call it again? Mortaritaville?
Yeah.
Where you were? So all these mortars are falling every day around you. It's just like it becomes a part of the weather, basically, outside.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. So our first night there, so when we first got there, one of the first things you do when you arrive is they got to figure out where you're going to sleep. So we moved into Tent City because the unit we were falling in on hadn't left what was going to become our permanent housing yet. So, we had to spend like 2 weeks in the tents. Well, interestingly enough, Tent City got hit all the time. So our first night there, incoming alarms go off. The C-Rams, counter rocket and mortar fire, which is actually phalanx systems that auto-track mortars and rockets. And they're really loud, light up the whole sky. Pull up a YouTube video. It's kind of fun to watch.
What's it called?
C-Ram. C-RAM.
And you said it was a phalanx?
Yeah. That's what the Navy calls it. The Army calls it C-Ram.
Let's see. I probably can't put this in the corner of the screen.
Yeah, it's like a 25 millimeter Gatling gun that fires an insane amount of rounds a second.
I just want to know what you're talking about. So people, if you're listening or watching right now, you can check this on YouTube. I do have a video up. But I'll just see it real quick.
So you've got mortars landing. You've got
one of these. I got it playing now. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, go ahead.
I will also say one of the funniest pictures of a phalanx I ever saw was they made a giant fabric covering for the radar dome over it that looks like a minion. So actually, if you go to like C-Ram on Google and go through images, you'll run into it. It's
the minion C-Ram.
Yes.
That I can put up.
So, but those things are going off, lighting up the night sky. Mortars are
oh my God,
are impacting and all this stuff, and we get put into a formation so that in the middle of a mortar attack, so that they can do, an accountability check. I'm like, we're all gonna die.
An accountability check?
So after there's an attack. So every unit has to do accountability to make sure that nobody's injured, hurt, and missing. So because the last thing you want is for everybody to be like, okay, everybody's fine, and not know there's some guy in a ditch somewhere.
Right.
So you have to do 100% accountability. So if you're on base and you're not near your unit, and as soon as the all clear is given, you have to immediately check in with your unit and say, hey, I'm good. So they're doing this accountability in a formation, which is, a giant rectangle in the middle of a mortar attack. Like, one mortar, we're all going to die. That's the first day. And we're all like, we're all freaking out. Like it's insane. It wasn't very long where like it goes off and you get up in the middle of the night and you're like, damn it. Now I got to put on flip flops and go over to the bunkers. I'm just tired. And it's really weird.
Oh, so you did have bunkers like underground for everyone to go to?
They weren't underground. They were just they were basically concrete U's flipped on top of themselves, so it's like a little concrete tunnel.
Okay.
They will protect. You can also there's also hardened buildings and things like that.
So they had room for 5,000 people when you were about to be under attack to be able to try to get to.
Well,
they could all go.
Yeah, it wasn't one giant bunker. It was just like there were bunkers everywhere.
Got it. Okay.
And they were just like, honestly, like concrete culverts that were big, and you just go sit in them. I don't know how much protection they'd provide on an absolute direct hit, but, you know, the biggest problem is it lands, it explodes, it throws shrapnel, you know, 100 feet or whatever. Well, if you're in there, none of that's going to hurt you. So, but it's interesting because a lot of the problems like hypervigilance and all these things are assets when you're over there. Then you come home and, you know, you can add on top of that the relationship issues and my ex leaving and all of that. But
did that happen from the first deployment or Iraq?
I only have one deployment to Iraq.
Yeah, but you had the deployment in Japan.
Yeah, I was single the whole time.
Okay, so I missed that. So when you were talking about that, you weren't talking about that one. You were talking about after Iraq.
Correct.
Okay, so that's the same first wife.
Yeah.
Got it.
And we'd been married 7 years or something like that at that point. But, you know, came home, had an ungodly amount of problems, nightmares every night. You know, it was weird. I wouldn't go upstairs and sleep. I ended up sleeping on the couch every night, drinking at least a bottle of vodka. And I lived close enough to Fort Bragg that I could actually hear impacts when they were doing artillery occasionally. But I also knew that I was hearing impacts that weren't there. And I'd hear helicopters that weren't there. And so, you know, Christmas Eve 2006, I went to a bar that I like to go to before I went to Iraq and started drinking. Had gotten about halfway through my second drink, so I wasn't trash or anything like that. And I heard the church bells from midnight mass. I'm like, I need to be there, not here. So I walked over to Sacred Heart Church in Raleigh, North Carolina, and was told, and on the way there, like these different things just started hitting me, and I was bawling my eyes out by the time I got there. And so, you know, go in, and there's a dude in front of the door, and I'm like, wow, this will be a rowdy service. And he's like, we're full. I'm like, what do you mean you're full? I'm like, he's like, we're at capacity. I'm like, okay, I just got back from Iraq. I really need to just go in. He goes, you can come back in the morning. So I went and I sat at the War Memorial in downtown Raleigh and was thinking of the best, most impactful way to take my life.
Was it that guy? Was it that moment of like rejection that just put you over the top, or was it something you had been maybe not recognizing you were thinking about before?
It was self-hatred, thinking I was a bad person for things that happen overseas that I won't get into. You know, the rejection of coming home to nothing. The idea that I got off the plane after serving my country for a year and there was no one there. Yeah. You know, and that coupled with the rejection, you know, I was raised Catholic, wasn't ever very religious, but like that was the place, you know, that was supposed to be the safe place. So then I'm like, wait a minute, these briefings, they keep saying, if you think this way, go to the hospital. So I got in my car and I drove to Womack Army Medical Center and I went to the ER. And I said, I'm going to kill myself. So they put me under suicide watch and then had a doctor come in, talk to me. He's like, you know, it's a holiday. I'm like, yeah. By now it's like 2 a.m. on Christmas morning. And he's like, do you have guns at home? I'm like, yeah, a lot. He's like, do you have ammo for those guns? I'm like, a fuck ton. He's like, when you get home, I want you to give those to your neighbor. Go wake your neighbor up and give him your guns. Here's 6 Xanax. Don't take them all at the same time because it'll kill you. But there's no point in checking you in because nobody will be able to see you till after the holiday anyway. So just go home and come back after the holiday. So I went home and I drank a bottle of vodka and I loaded a Beretta 9mm and I put it to my temple and I pulled the trigger. And it was a squib load, meaning there was a manufacturing defect in the round meant that there was no gunpowder.
Holy shit.
So, which also is really weird when you hear a pop and you think you just killed yourself and you're like, fuck, it's all still here. And because it took a minute, it took like a second to realize that like there was a problem and it didn't work. That was one of 5 total since I got back.
One of 5 total attempts?
Yeah, I put a gun to my head twice and pulled the trigger. The second time was a broken spring. I tried to overdose and I've slit my wrist twice.
But this was the first one.
This was the first one. Christmas morning, 2006. My last one was November 3rd, 2013.
So this is over a long period of time. So what after that, and it didn't work, what made you not reload the weapon and try again?
Because my thought was, I can't even kill myself right. And at that point, I passed out. I had 4 attempts, and then I had a friend of mine introduce me to a thing called cannabis.
Huh.
So at the age of 33, 3 years after I got back, after 4 suicide attempts, I tried cannabis for the first time.
How was that?
It was fantastic. It's a pretty funny story. I was single at the time. It was a longtime friend of mine who I hadn't seen in forever, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to go back to my place and smoke a bowl and hook up?" My mind, I'm like, I want to hook up, and I've never tried weed, so this sounds like a fun day for me. But the thing I did that was interesting is, so I went and got high as hell and had a lot of fun. And the next day, I didn't think of killing myself for the first time in a while, like 3 years, because
You were thinking about it every day.
Every day. Even if I had a great day, it would pop into my head driving home. I should just hit the accelerator and slam into a wall.
I mean, you had tried 4 times at that point, so it's not like you hadn't tried or anything.
Right.
That's a lot. But every day for like 3 years,
Yeah.
then you do math and you're like, man, all those days except for 4 of them, you fought it off, or like you just didn't do it, or you didn't try.
There were so many times I'd stand on a bridge. Oh, I thought about it. I planned it constantly. One of the ways I dealt with my suicidal ideology was I'd plan it for the future. I'd say, okay, July 4th, that's my day. And I'd plan the whole thing out. Exactly where, how, all of it.
Were you thinking about death with it and what that meant? Or was it just, I need to make whatever this is stop? And so I want to make an event out of it.
I knew death would stop it. And I figured if I'm going to go out, I'm going to send a message.
To the people that come after you who are ignored like you were.
To the VA, to the government,
right.
To everybody that this is a problem and people need help. But it was literally every day. I was thinking of killing myself.
Are you working during all this?
Started when I first got back trying, kept getting fired, kept having problems. Actually, I got fired from a job because I went to the VA instead of killing myself.
And they fired you for that, for not showing up?
Yeah. Although I called beforehand. I said, hey, I can't come to work today. I'm not feeling well. I need to go to the VA. They're like, well, what's wrong? I'm like, I'm going to hurt myself and I need to go talk to somebody. Like,
and they fired you.
They're like, go take care of it. And then the doctor called them and said, hey, he's got a doctor's note. He's off for 2 days. And they're like, okay. So after the 2 days were up, they called me up. They're like, hey, that laptop you have, we need to do some repair work on it. So we need you to bring it in. I did. And that's when they fired me.
Oh, my God.
And part of it was their fear was I would lose my shit and hurt them or hurt other employees. And that's something that, like, not every veteran has PTSD. It's like, it's a high percentage, like 20%, but that means 80% don't. But there's a lot of employers who think they all do and that they're all going to go postal. And so that's how you have a lot of employment issues.
It's got to be a better
amongst
way.
Veterans.
It's got to be a better way to handle that.
And so, I used cannabis for 5 years, and it was very helpful. It kept me away from actually committing suicide.
You were still thinking about it, though.
I was. But, you know, when things got bad, I'd go smoke a joint and go to sleep. You know, I also had a service dog who kept me alive on many occasions. There was many a time where I didn't jump off the bridge because I didn't know who would take care of her. Because my love for her was greater than my love for myself.
Wow. It's a special dog.
It is. And I had her for 14 and a half years. And the good thing is she actually got to retire at about 10 years old and no longer be a service dog and just be a family pet.
Wow.
And not a lot of service dogs get to do that. And I'll tell you, it was hard and a lot of grief when she passed. And she passed in my arms at home. It's kind of funny because she waited for my kid to go on a trip with my second wife. Because me and Olivia had talked and like we knew it was coming. We just didn't know when. And, you know, one of her questions is, hey, if something happens when you're, you know, traveling to DC, what do you want me to do? And, you know, her and Joey were going on a trip to Ohio and they were gone a few hours and she went. But also I had no idea. I fully anticipated that I would have to be hospitalized when she passed.
Jesus.
Because even though I went through the MDMA therapy and all of that and things were great, I always had her as a crutch. She was always in the background. And having that, you know, go away. I didn't know if it would break me.
It kept you alive, as you said.
Yeah, and you know.
What was the dog's name?
Becky.
What kind of dog?
Brittany Spaniel. Her name was Becky Lubecky.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I actually, in May of last year, because she also passed like July of 2020, right in the middle of COVID. So, but last year I got a Boykin Spaniel, and her name is Her Royal Highness Princess Rebecca II of Park Riverside, Becca for short.
That's awesome.
Because and she's a great dog. Definitely not a service dog. She just loves everybody. Awesome dog.
That works.
But I could see a little bit of Becky in her, and in part because Boykins have a little bit of Brittany Spaniel in them. But you know, and it's really weird because, you know, Becky spent her life taking care of me, and now, you know, I get to just take care of this little pup.
Oh, that's
She's
fucking awesome, man. That's such a good way to look at it, too. And thank God Becky was there.
Oh, I wouldn't be alive if it weren't for her.
Yeah, people that don't... Dogs are just unbelievably special creatures, man. And like that, you know, they say man's best friend. They don't say that enough. It is the truest thing ever. And it's like, you know, they're here for such a short time in the context of how long we can live. But, you know, whether it's a service dog who they do amazing work, CNI dog, stuff like that, or just, you know, the dog who's the family dog who loves you. There's nothing quite like that. And to see the context of a very full story that you have here, years and years and years, between first going into the military, going into the Marines, and then eventually even the Army and everything, getting back, being alone, you know, your wife leaves you, which that whole thing is crazy that happened right when you were coming back too. And then dealing with all these things, and you have an animal there and nothing else. You're losing these jobs because people don't understand. You're going through all these attempts to kill yourself, you're planning it out, all this stuff, but the dog is the thing that you have such a love for that it still gave a meaning to the world. Even if it didn't give meaning to you, Becky gave a meaning to the world because you were afraid of what would happen if you weren't here.
Yeah.
And now it's come full circle, and we're going to get into everything as to why, but like it's come full circle that luckily you do love life and have a great life now and everything, and that legacy of your dog is really one of the driving things, it sounds like, that was behind that. It's so cool, man.
That and you know, one of the things that I talk about a lot is there's a lot of people who have PTSD and they use it as an excuse to be a shitty human. And I get the underlying psychology on that, but also, you know, if you have PTSD, if you have a problem, even you know, when I was contemplating suicide every day, I worked and I tried to get better. I tried whatever they wanted me to try. They're like, this will work, and it never did. But
were you conscious of how you were with other people, or were you constantly living outside yourself a little bit?
It kind of depended on the moment. There were times where like I'd flip my shit and everything seemed rational, and later I'm like, oh wow. And sometimes like even in the moment I'd be like, oh wow. And there was a lot of stuff like if I saw somebody specifically in traditional Muslim garb with a backpack, I would literally cross the street. I would avoid them, at all costs because I saw them as a threat. My body reacted to that person, no matter how innocent and perfectly wonderful a human being I'm sure they were. And I knew that in my brain.
You did while it was happening?
Yes. I would literally tell myself that person is perfectly fine and normal. This is not a threat, but my body reacted. And the only way to make that panic attack go away was to remove myself from that situation and create distance. And, and it was weird because like be walking down the street with, wife and kid, and we all have to cross the street for cause I'm freaking out. Crowds, things like that didn't help. And, the auditory hallucinations were kind of weird where you hear things that really aren't there. I'd see smoke that wasn't there, which was kind of weird too. But, I used that cannabis to help for 5 years. And then I met my second wife, who lived in South Carolina.
So you were single for like a big chunk of that. Wow.
Okay. Yeah, because having a relationship is kind of hard.
Yeah, I figured, but you were talking about the second wife. I wasn't sure when that happened.
So, and I moved down to South Carolina, and the problem was, she had my now stepson, and she was afraid that if I got caught with weed in South Carolina, where it's really illegal, like they keep getting sued for doing body cavity searches on black people on the side of the road.
In South Carolina?
In South Carolina, yeah. So weed is super illegal there. And her
still?
Yeah, very.
Come on.
So, her fear was that if I got caught with cannabis, that her ex-husband would try to take her kid away. Total, very reasonable logic.
Very fair, yeah.
So I stopped.
So
I stopped smoking cannabis.
What year is that?
That would be 2013. January 2013 to be specific. And I went back to the VA. They had me on at one point 42 pills a day.
42? What kind of pills?
I'll have to send you the list. And it was crazy because they had me on 5 different pills because I had a quarter-sized herniation in my back that I was awaiting surgery on, and they didn't want to prescribe me opiates. So they gave me like 5 weird things as painkillers that interacted with each other, and then they interacted with my mental health meds and et cetera, to the point where I would literally just pass out. And, it was a concern because at one point I was driving and I literally barely got off the side of the road to stop before I passed out. And so like that wasn't working. And they were cycling me through multiple meds without tapers.
Tapers? Can you explain that?
So with a lot of SSRIs and mental health meds, there's a thing called a taper, which is you have to build up slowly and you have to come off them slowly. SSRIs totally suck. I get why people hate them. Stopping them cold turkey is very dangerous.
And that's like, for people out there, that's like Prozac.
Prozac, Zoloft is huge in the VA. But that actually caused my brain to go haywire.
I'm sure.
And so November
42 pills?
Yeah. So within 11 months of stopping to use cannabis, I had another suicide attempt and slit my wrists. And this is one of the things about cannabis. It is great. It is palliative. It is not a cure.
Right. It's a mask.
As soon as, it doesn't deal with any of the underlying issues, it only, it mitigates the symptoms. And it is very good at that. But
how often were you smoking? Like how many times a day?
All day.
So you were just in a constant state of like solid high.
Nah, I wouldn't say that, because what I preferred was like a vape cartridge, so I would self titrate and not be super stoned all day. But yeah, I was buzzed all the time. And sometimes if things got bad, yeah, I'd smoke like a whole joint and go to, and I also knew, and this is where it was interesting, and I always kind of wondered if I could have managed things better if it was legal under a medical program. Because I was in North Carolina where it was also illegal. So, I didn't get to pick strains. I didn't get to pick indica or sativa. I got what a dude had in a bag in a parking lot. So, when I could, indica knocks me out. Like indica in the couch.
Yeah, no, same.
And so I would have indica, and if things got really bad, I'd smoke an indica joint and literally just go to bed.
When you say that's the second time you did that, so what would be the context if things got bad? Like what were you still, in 2013, were you still constantly having these I see smoke where there's not smoke type hallucinations? Oh, yeah. That was still all going on? All
that was going on. And actually the cannabis didn't really help with that part, but it did lower anxiety. It helped reduce panic attacks.
So it kept you calm when you would see that, basically.
Yeah, it kept me calm, and it kept me like on this side of an actual suicide attempt. And when I say things get bad, it's I'm going to jump off a bridge.
But is there a specific trigger that would lead to that?
Like if I had to go do something in a giant crowd, and there was a lot of. So another weird thing is black socks.
Black socks.
So somebody wearing black socks in a suit is fine. Somebody wearing black socks in like athletic shorts and a t-shirt.
I could think of a few people that did that. Sure.
So that is a very like not American thing. People in Europe, people in the Middle East do that quite a bit. In part because, we're a pretty wealthy country, so we can have all these different colored socks and all this stuff. And, if you live in Iraq, you may only have 3 pairs. And so the idea of, I'm going from dress shoes to, tennis shoes. I should change from black socks to white socks or something like that. It just doesn't happen.
But we were wearing them. Like I remember we would wear the high top black, like Nike socks with basketball shoes, like to play basketball. So you're talking about like when you would see that, I guess.
That was part of it, but it was more like just, I don't like go play basketball stuff, so I didn't really see that. But no, like if I was at Universal Studios and there's a guy in line in front of me who had dark skin and was wearing black socks and tennis shoes there, it would freak me out. Gunfire, fireworks. South Carolina and the 4th of July is worse than Mortaritaville. You have people who make pipe bombs all year, just set them off on the 4th of July. And actually 2013, 4th of July in South Carolina, was sitting in a house. This was 2014. Was the entire neighborhood was going off with fireworks so much my house was literally shaking. And I was in the walk-in closet in body armor with my service dog, thinking I was in a bunker in Iraq.
I saw you talk about this one, and particularly with the psychiatrist during some of the tapes of your sessions. Mm-hmm. So was this literally right before you did that then? Because you started in 2014, right?
Yeah. So taking one small step back, I came back. I came off orders from Iraq November 22nd of 2006. Mm-hmm. I took my first dose of MDMA November 22nd, 2014.
So when this July 4th event was happening, did you know you were going to be in that trial at this point? I'm just curious.
No, I don't believe so. Okay. It was a possibility, but I believe I had just had like maybe the intro call with them.
Got it. So the point is you're off cannabis. Everything is in full swing again. All these different triggers are happening. We probably go. It sounds like we go through a lot of them if we wanted to. But the bottom line is like things are not good. Mm-hmm. So when did that?
I would also get triggered and not have any clue why.
Like with what kinds of things?
I don't know. That's the point. I could literally just be walking down the street and lose my shit and not even know what triggered it.
But it wouldn't be like, I'm just gonna make some up. It wouldn't be something specific that you don't know why. It's like if someone's like cutting an apple and you don't know why that's triggering you, but it would be the same thing every time, like someone's cutting an apple.
These were times where like I would get triggered, but for no discernible reason,
just out of nowhere.
Right.
Okay.
And I do understand how weird things can be kind of triggering. So, for example, my son actually now has PTSD. He almost died on a cruise ship.
Jesus.
And he had to be medevaced by the Coast Guard on a helicopter.
What happened?
He had an internal GI bleed and lost 50% of his blood supply in about an hour.
Holy shit.
Yeah, I thought he died in my arms.
Where was that? It was on a cruise, but where?
Off the coast of the Bahamas.
What, did he get like hit or something? Like internal bleeding type deal? And he didn't know it?
No, so without getting too much into his medical history, what happened was he has suffered from migraine headaches. And doctors said, hey, just give him ibuprofen or Tylenol. And it literally ate a hole through his stomach.
Holy shit.
He no longer takes NSAIDs. But
holy shit.
So
that's scary.
Yeah, so now he has PTSD. And so one of his big triggers is flying. Like, not just flying on helicopters, but like even on a regular airplane.
Because he remembers, I guess, the whole matter.
Well, and it's kind of funny because, you know, Olivia thought, who's now my second ex-wife, but, you know, she's like, well, he's just scared of flying. And I'm like, it's not that he's scared of flying. Explaining how planes work isn't going to solve this. He's being triggered and it's taking him back to when he almost died. And I will say mad props to the Coast Guard crew. They flew through a storm twice, once to come get Joey and then once to get him to the hospital in Miami. Wow. And the Coast Guard, and actually part of the reason the Coast Guard came out is because nobody else would. So I called a politician and they got me a helicopter.
That's amazing. Wow. When was that?
Oh, that would have been 2019.
Okay. So, and you were obviously, you said you almost died in your arms. You were right there experiencing all this. Okay.
Oh, I've had a lot of stuff happen actually since I went through MDMA therapy. I had a gentleman drowned in the lake behind my house, dove in, pulled him out, did CPR on him for like 20 minutes till EMS arrived. There was a shooting on Hanover Street in Charleston. I ran towards that, did CPR on the gunshot victim. Neither of them survived and died in my arms. Just this past Memorial Day, I saw a guy who was on a pedal bike get hit by an F-250 coming off Folly Beach. Stopped to help him. Fortunately, he made it, at least to my knowledge.
Wow.
So yeah, I've had those things happen, and actually, I still don't have PTSD. Also, over the past 5 months, I've gone to Moldova, Romania, Poland, and Ukraine on humanitarian support missions.
You were in all right. You know what? We'll get to that later because I don't want to lose this. I'll be on that all day. We'll get to Ukraine. But so you've said it, you did the first treatment in 2014. When did it come on your radar that this was a possibility that you could treat PTSD with MDMA? So
when I was hospitalized, to be released, you have to have a suicide prevention plan. And one of the things that I asked for, the only thing I asked for, of all the things I asked for, this was the only thing the VA actually did. And that was, I said, I need weekly counseling. I need to see someone for an hour, at least once a week.
You said that?
Yes.
Oh, good for you.
And they're like, okay. And my psychiatrist, who was the head of mental health for the Charleston VA, actually did a fantastic job.
That's not the same one who ended up.
No.
Okay, got it.
You know, she came. I went there for an appointment sometime in 2014, and something was going on the inpatient floor. And she comes down. She's like, "Hey, I got this. Something going on. I need to take care of it. If you need meds, you know, you can sit with my intern, and I'll put them in, and you can pick them up when you leave." Because you have to be seen for me to renew the prescription.
I just want to be clear on timeline too, so that I understand and everyone out there following. You would say you went off cannabis in January 2013, right? And then you attempted to commit suicide by slitting your wrists in November 2013.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay, so that's when you were hospitalized. That's
Correct.
what you're talking about.
Yes.
And when you went to leave, that's when you asked for I need
weekly
to see
therapy.
someone once.
And
a
then
week.
I got weekly therapy, and they
Got
were
it.
actually really good about it. But this one week in early 2014, she came down and she's like, "Hey, I got to take care of this." She's like, "We can either just do next week, or I can see if I can schedule you later in the week, or sit with the intern and in the meds." I'm like, "All right, cool. I'll sit with the intern. I'll pick my meds up, and then I'll talk to you next week." She's like, "All right, cool." Go sit down with the intern, and I'm glad I made that choice. Part of it was at the time it'd take about an hour and a half to find a parking space at the Charleston VA, and I had already invested a lot of time. I wasn't just gonna go home. But she slid this piece of paper across the desk that was folded in half, and said, "Don't open this until you leave, because I'm not supposed to tell you about this." And I'm like, "Is this a phone number, or like what's going on here?" And I open it up, and it says Google MDMA PTSD.
Wow.
And so I did, and I'm like, "Well, this is cool."
And where did things stand at the time? Like, was that a thing yet for veterans, or was it the earliest permutations of the trials?
So it was phase 2 trial.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, it was going on in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, just across the bridge. So
Open to anybody.
So I called them, and I was like, "Hey," not open to anybody. There was a clinical trial, so
That's what I would have thought.
yeah.
But
And so I called them, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm kind of crazy." And they're like, "Well, what do you mean?" And I explain it, and they're like, "Oh, okay, cool. You're kind of crazy." Went in and talked with them, and passed all the interviews. Did a full physical. I mean, it's a clinical trial, so there's a whole bunch of weird FDA stuff. Did a full psych eval and all of that, and was accepted as the 26th person in a 25-person study featuring veterans and first responders. The reason they expanded it is because 2 people did not finish and dropped out of the trial because they felt that they had completely healed after 1 or 2 doses and did not need the second or third dose. So there was room for one more, and that was me, and the door slammed behind me.
wow. That was some fate right there.
Yeah.
And this was, I'm going to mispronounce her name if I try, but it was
Mithoefer.
the husband and wife?
Yeah, and Michael and Annie Mithoefer.
Okay, so it was really cool because they're recording all this for the study purposes. And
Yeah, so if you're in a clinical trial, 100% of the stuff's recorded on multiple cameras. And one of the things that's used for is compliance, to ensure that they're actually following the protocol, that like there's nothing untoward going on, et cetera, et cetera.
So this was all what was featured in Michael Pollan's new documentary on Netflix in episode 3 called How to Change Your Mind. It is fantastic. Everyone should watch it. And he wrote a book of the same name.
Yes.
So this was a follow-up to that. And so they had the 2 doctors in there profiled, and then they used your sessions as an example, where we get to see you take an MDMA, tripping balls, but have an unbelievably revelatory, basically regular sessions with them, except you're on MDMA, talking through all your experience and everything. And then you were great in it, by the way, like going through and explaining things now and what your perspective is. But
it's like doing therapy while being hugged by everyone who loves you in a bathtub full of puppies licking your face.
You didn't say that in the documentary, so I'm glad we got that here. That's great. So you get connected with these 2. They had, from what it looks like in the documentary and what they said, they had been working on potential treatments or ideas around MDMA for a long time, right?
So MDMA was originally invented in the early 1900s by Merck Pharmaceutical. It was one of the many steps along the way. They were trying to get the styptic effect out of mescaline, blood coagulation to stop bleeding.
Got it. But they put it on the shelf, right?
Yeah, they put it on the shelf because, somebody gets injured on the battlefield or something. You can't give them MDMA to make them stop bleeding. There's way better solutions. So it got put on the shelf. It got rediscovered by Sasha Shulgin in the 50s. Might have been late 40s. And they started using it for therapy. and it was used for therapy, but like a lot of things, it escaped the lab, it escaped the therapist's office, and people started doing it at raves. And in the early 80s, there was a big spate of a bunch of rich white kids who went to raves and died because they didn't practice proper harm reduction.
Proper what?
Harm reduction. So they didn't hydrate. They didn't like take care of themselves.
Yeah. Yep.
And they overheated and all of that. And so the DEA proposed rescheduling MDMA to Schedule 1.
And this is right in the heart of like when they were starting the war on drugs and all that.
Well,
like 84, 85?
85, but the war on drugs was started by Nixon. So in the 70s, so the Controlled Substances Act had already passed. Marijuana, all that was all illegal. MDMA was added later.
Wait, am I totally blanking right here? I always thought of the war on drugs, and I've talked about it on this podcast before, so maybe I got this wrong every time. I thought the war on drugs was basically started by Reagan.
Nixon.
Nixon started it. Like, did he use the words war on drugs?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, yeah, Nixon realized he couldn't go arrest hippies and black people who were causing problems, so he made weed and heroin and psychedelics and other things illegal so he could arrest the things that they used. That's why the drug war was started. And so it was ramped up by Reagan and much more so by H.W. Bush, who infamously went and bought crack across from the White House.
Wait, H.W. Bush bought crack across from the White House?
They had an undercover DEA agent go buy crack across the street from the White House, and then he held a press conference. He from the Oval Office, he held up a bag of crack. It's the funniest thing in the world.
I have to watch that.
But also,
wait, is there? There's a video of that. Hold on. This is Bush 1. You're saying?
Yes.
George H.W. Bush, crack, White House press conference. That dealer was sitting at home going, hit the jackpot.
And it was like a giant bag, too.
Oh, it's not there. I typed in HW, too.
Type in George Bush, Oval Office, bag of crack. Let's see what happens.
George H.W. Bush, Oval Office, bag of crack. Oh my God, we got it. All right, hold on. Stick it on mute for a sec. Let's find the spot. It's a longer video. It's called 1989 Throwback. George Bush holds huge bag of crack cocaine. All right, here we go. Oh, shit. Hold on. Here we go. It's behind you.
Tonight I'll tell you how many Americans are using illegal drugs. I will present to you our national strategy to deal with every aspect of this threat, and I will ask you to get involved in what promises to be a very difficult fight. This is crack cocaine, seized a few days ago by drug enforcement agents in a park just across the street from the White House. Could easily have been
that's a
heroin
big bag of crack.
I never saw that. I love learning random shit on here that I've never heard of. Yeah. That's amazing.
But no. So the DEA proposed making MDMA Schedule 1, and then they were sued. Administrative law judge came down and said it should be scheduled, but it definitely has therapeutic value and should not be Schedule 1. So Schedule 2, Schedule 3, somewhere around there. DEA said, yeah, no. Used emergency scheduling authority and made it illegal anyway on July 1st, 1985. In 1986, Rick Doblin started MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, to take MDMA through the FDA process.
He's been working on this like his entire adult life.
Yeah, 36 years.
It's amazing.
36 years to get where we are right now, which is hopefully a year or two away from FDA approval.
For medicinal use under the supervision of a psychiatrist. Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the good thing is he broke down a lot of walls and literally wrote the manual on how to take Schedule 1 narcotics through the FDA model, which is why you see now psilocybin and some of these other drugs going through the same model, and they won't take 36 years. Those will be a lot quicker. But, hey, you got W holding a giant bag of crack. But also, let's not forget, Clinton ramped up the drug war too.
Yep.
I mean, the current president, Joe Biden, is the author of the Rave Act. You know,
I'm not familiar with that.
he banned raves and all this because MDMA was such a dangerous drug. He stood on the Senate floor and talked about how MDMA was so dangerous it should never even be researched. And 6 days later, he voted to send me to Iraq. You know, and this is where it's frustrating for me because, you know, Hunter Biden. No, this isn't going to go anywhere where you think it will. No.
I'm sorry, I just got
No,
lost.
it's fine. But Hunter Biden, you know, we're all aware of some of his issues.
Yeah.
And you know what? I have an enormous amount of empathy for Hunter because he was in the car when his mother and sister died.
Yeah,
And
he was.
that's everything that we've seen in the pictures and the addiction issues he has faced. You know, that is a manifestation of PTSD and what happened to him as a very young child. And I have the utmost empathy and compassion because I know how that happens very personally. It's happened to me. It's happened to friends of mine. And he went down to Mexico and he did Ibogaine treatment.
Hunter did.
Hunter did. In
When was this?
2019.
Can you explain Ibogaine treatment to people out there who don't know what that is?
I will do the best I can. It's something.
High level.
Yeah. So Ibogaine is a West African root that has a psychedelic effect that is highly effective in helping with PTSD, TBI, and addiction. In particular, it's highly effective with opiate use disorder. And so he went down to Mexico and did Ibogaine therapy. As a matter of fact, there's an organization of Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions that does the same thing. They provide grants to operators and others, so Navy SEALs,
Yes.
Special Forces, to go to Peru, Mexico, other places to do Ibogaine therapy, the same type of therapy that Hunter did, in part because it works.
And because we're not doing it here because we still have all these bells and whistles blocking the way.
Exactly. And so, you know, Hunter Biden went down, and that's why you haven't, you know, this is why he's painting now. You haven't seen any pictures of him with a crack pipe since 2019. He's, in my understanding, is he actually has recovered very well from his addiction and no longer has those issues, which means the president of the United States knows it works. And 50,000 veterans committed suicide while Joe Biden was vice president. 22 a day since he's become president. He knows it works. He, with the stroke of a pen, could fix a lot of this. But he's an old school drug warrior. He fired, one of his first acts as president was firing people for weed.
Really? I didn't even know that.
Oh yeah. So they told people to be honest about their weed consumption for their clearances. They were told, look, you can't smoke it anymore, but you got to be honest and you'll be fine. So they did, and Joe Biden was given a choice that either he could change the rules for everyone, or he could fire the people.
The people who admitted it, because everyone else fucking smokes it.
Right. And so he that was one of his first acts. He's already said he won't do anything with cannabis till 2024.
Why? It has total, like, these are issues that are not difficult as far as like public polling goes. There's Republicans who are hardcore behind this shit now.
The interesting thing when it comes to on the policy side, it's not a left-right thing. It's an old-young thing. And a lot of the people who grew up in the DARE generation, and you know what? I get it. We now all know why Joe Biden's been so anti-drug, because he saw addiction to destroy his son. And I can understand that, but also he's got to, he should also understand that he sent his son to Mexico to do Ibogaine therapy, and it worked. And I'm ecstatic for Hunter Biden. I'm glad he got better. I don't want anybody who suffers from addiction issues or has PTSD or is suffering in any way to suffer. And if they can find what can help them, fantastic.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about this, that he got Ibogaine. I got to look into that.
Well, and it's funny, there was a recording that the right-wing media has been talking about of Hunter that is a very accurate recording. And it says along the lines of, my father listens to me. He does what I say on these things. And they were implying that it had to do with, with business transactions. He was actually referring to addiction. Him talking to his father about addiction. If you actually...
Wait, how do you know that? I don't know what one you're talking about either. I haven't seen
so everybody would play this short clip. If you go and find the source clip that's longer, you can hear the whole conversation. And he's entirely talking about addiction.
Oh, that's interesting.
So Hunter is actually trying to push his father to do more on addiction services and things like that. Coming from a place of knowledge, the same kind of knowledge that I have of this works. And I know it works because it worked for me. Right. So if I'm not that special. I mean, I'm sure Hunter thinks he's special, but I'm not that special. Millions of veterans have the same story I do.
Yeah.
The difference is I did MDMA 3 times.
And it can work.
Yeah. And so, it's not just Republicans. It's not just Nixon and Reagan. Like Clinton did it. And I believe Clinton's brother smoked weed on the roof of the White House, which I totally don't blame him. If I could smoke a joint. I don't blame him. Like, I really don't.
It's Bill Clinton's brother. I think Bill Clinton was up there with him.
And I don't have a I'll be honest, like, there's a lot of presidents that have needed some psychedelic therapy. Yes. There's a lot of presidents who probably would have benefited after a hard day, going up to the roof or walking out into the rose garden and smoking a bowl.
They probably did, a lot of them.
Yeah, but...
Not all of them, but...
And all of, when it comes to cannabis, any president can legalize it. It's really kind of funny. There were 2 distinct opportunities in the last administration to legalize weed in the United States. And they were both entirely blocked by Democrats.
Why? Wait, what were the 2 opportunities? I didn't know about this.
So one was Cory Gardner out of Colorado.
Yeah.
Struck a deal, got Trump's approval, got Republican approval, got and everything for the States Act, which would have legalized cannabis in states that choose to legalize it. Would have fixed the banking issues, would have fixed a whole bunch of stuff. So basically South Carolina, which wants to still make it illegal, can make it illegal if they want. Just like in, I believe it's Alabama, still has dry counties and you cannot purchase alcohol. But on the federal level, it would have been legalized.
So that you're saying that would supersede?
Yes. So here's the thing. No one would ever be federally prosecuted for anything involving cannabis from that point forward.
But there could still be some state prosecutions.
In states that would make it illegal. But like South Carolina keeps it illegal and doesn't even have a medical problem or program because their response is, well, the federal government says it's illegal. There's nothing we can do. Which is funny because South Carolina is like the OG states' rights will go to war if the federal government tells us what to do. They've already done it once back in 1860.
Yeah, I forgot about that one.
So, which, fun fact, my alma mater, the Citadel, fired the first shots of the Civil War. Yes, the Civil War was started by a bunch of rowdy college kids. Go figure.
Wow. That seems...
But
wow.
So a lot of states, a lot of people would feel more comfortable if it was federally legal. And it would also fix the problem where we have 43 states, something like that. There's only a handful that don't even have medical now. And it would fix a lot of problems.
Why did the Democrats block that? That seems also counterintuitive.
What did they say? Or
what did they say, or what was the real reason?
It didn't go far enough. So therefore, do more or nothing. And the truth is, Democrats have been fighting for cannabis since the 70s.
Yeah.
It's their issue, and they weren't going to give Trump the win. It's the same reason why the vote on the MORE Act was moved in the House till after the election, because there was a fear that if the House passed a legalization bill, Mitch McConnell would pass it under Trump's orders in October before the election.
And that was the second one.
That was the second one.
And then you saw this recent one that's not cannabis with the burn pits, where it's the other way around, where suddenly, it had all the support for a long time, and then suddenly they're like, no, we're not going to do this.
Oh, and this is the crazy part.
Now it's Republicans on
Yeah,
Democrats.
Republicans did a bunch of stupid. What happened was they had a deal with Joe Manchin on the CHIPS Act and reconciliation, and Manchin changed his mind on reconciliation for the bill that just passed yesterday, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a hilarious name. But so they threw a temper tantrum, and it could have been any bill, but it happened to be the PACT Act. It happened to be about toxic exposure in veterans. And it was wrong. They shouldn't have done it. Like, if you want to play those kind of games, play it on a different bill.
Sure.
Like, play it on a tax bill, play it on a budget bill, play it on something like that, not on this. Especially if you already voted for it. Like Rand Paul, he's voted no the whole way. Okay, at least he's consistent.
Yeah.
But don't vote for it, then vote no, then vote for it a couple days later. But
so dirty, man. They always throw, like, these sides always throw something in there, and that's probably, there's the ones that are clear political win base, like what you're talking about, for sure.
Yep.
And then there's also bills where, if I'm...
There's a poison pill.
Yeah, if I'm a Republican, and I'm making one up right now, but if I'm a Republican and I want harder restrictions on abortions, and then I toss it into a bill that's about a tax plan. Yeah. And then they say, oh, look, they voted down the tax plan or whatever. Well, that's why they voted it down, because something else got put in there. And then that's not, It's all marketing. It's all marketing.
Well, and this is the funny thing, because, like, we saw Jon Stewart yelling into microphones. There were protests at the Capitol, and everybody was vilifying the Republicans. And I'll tell you, Republicans are just plain stupid for fist bumping on the fucking Senate floor.
Yeah,
but,
that was dumb.
It's funny. Burn pits aren't a new issue. They've been an issue for 22 years.
Can you tell people what burn pits are out there who don't know?
Yeah, so when the U.S. government decides to invade a country, we can't, like, use their trash people to take care of our trash. So we create giant burn pits, and we put every piece of waste, food products, toilet paper, blown up Humvees, body parts, you name it, everything goes into the burn pit, and it burns 24/7. The one on the base I was on, I believe, was 10 acres.
You're breathing that in
for a year. I was just down in North Carolina at that change of command ceremony, and it's funny. All of us that deployed together were all standing in this circle, jaw jacking like we used to, and we've all got this dry cough. It goes from one to the other, and I'm like, hey, look, burn pits. But it's funny because those same things to help vets with burn pits were also filibustered for 4 years. And nobody batted an eye. I didn't see Jon Stewart yelling at anybody. He was out there saying #resist, vote against everything. So nobody bats an eye at that. I give a lot of respect to IAVA and Tom Porter, their VP Governmental Affairs. IAVA and some of these orgs that have been pushing for toxic burn pits, they've been doing it for 10 years. They don't care who's president. They don't care who controls the Senate. They don't care who controls the House. It's about, this is a problem. We've got solutions. Let's get the solutions to the people who need them. And you constantly see this left and right. And it's also kind of funny where, again, Jon Stewart got a ton of publicity. A bunch of people are probably going to listen to his podcast and all that because of what he did. And yeah, he was fighting for vets, and that's a good thing.
He has fought on these issues though a lot.
But it's really funny if you look at the issues that when he chooses to fight, and that when he chooses to fight is when he gets to fight against Republicans.
That's probably right.
How about this? Burn pit legislation, you're right. And it's going to help a lot of veterans. 22 veterans a day are killing themselves. MDMA-assisted therapy, phase 3 trial shows 67% of people no longer have PTSD. An additional 21% have a massive reduction in symptoms. The President of the United States currently knows because his son went and did it. Where's Jon Stewart? Why isn't he calling for this? Why isn't he on the Capitol steps? Why
is he aware? Does he have education on it?
You want to tell me Jon Stewart doesn't know about psychedelics? Come on.
I'm not saying he doesn't know about that, but I'm saying, like, is this an issue that he's looked at? And is there a way that we can... I'll bet if you took this issue to Jon Stewart right now, I'll bet he'd do something about it.
I've emailed his people. So,
all right, well, let's make that happen.
I'd love to. I'd love to talk to him about it because here's the thing: you need people like that. You need people to push the issue, and I am more than willing to be proved wrong by Jon Stewart. But there's things that veterans need, and I'm going to tell you one of the biggest issues facing veterans is the PTSD epidemic, and it affects and infests everything. It's more than just how much DOD spends on treatment. It's more than what the VA spends on treatment. It's more than what VA pays in compensation, which is in the $100 billion just for PTSD. It affects families. Yeah. It's things like most operators get out at 15 years. Why? Because they can't make it to 20. So they don't get their retirement. They don't get anything. They don't even get health benefits.
It is amazing how poorly, and this has been a theme for a long, long time, but how poorly we take care of our veterans in this country. I don't understand it. It is something I would happily, if they said, hey, we're going to add, I don't know, I don't even know what it would take, 0.5% to your taxes every year, and it's going to that, fuck yeah, sign me up. It's not a difficult issue.
Well, and the funny thing is, after Vietnam, you had veterans spit on, and then they did nothing to help them. Here, we get parades, and we get handshakes, and we're thanked for our service, and then they do nothing.
Right. They just changed the wrapping paper. Still same shitty gift.
And, it's because that makes them feel better. I got to throw a parade. Yes, I got to do this.
Exactly.
Oh, wait. I own a small business. That vet seems a little weird. He might have PTSD. I'm not going to hire him.
And here's another thing, too. That aside, we're putting so much of it on regular Joe Blows in the private sector to then have to carry the whole responsibility. Yep. And maybe they're not smart enough to do that. Maybe they're not thinking enough about the responsibility that is to veterans. We don't put enough of our public resources on, for example, actually making our VAs effective. Giving veterans resources that are beyond just like, hey, we'll help you get your first job, then go fuck yourself. It starts at the steps back, and I hear this from in a different way from every veteran too. So it's not surprising to hear, and that makes me sad.
But here's the other thing. What is the root cause of all of those issues? So you have, and the answer is physical and mental injuries.
Yeah.
Physical injuries, they do the best they can, and actually the VA has a pretty decent record. They're overwhelmed and have too many people, but some of if it weren't for the VA, we wouldn't have the advancements in prosthetics that we have. And there's a lot of treatments for physical injuries that have come out of the VA, and they do good work. Mental injuries is a different story, and they try, but some of the best things to help heal mental injuries are still off the table, and that's the problem. And so, veteran homelessness, how much do you think mental health is involved in that?
1,000%.
Addiction issues amongst veterans, being able to hold a job. Like, we can go through almost every issue, and it can be tied to one of those two things, physical or mental injuries. Now, part of the problem is we treat mental injuries and physical injuries different. If you have a physical injury, you get a Purple Heart, you're treated as a hero, everything. You have a mental injury, well, you're just crazy. And I'm glad the military has come a long way since 05, 06, when it was, well, you were crazy before you came in. It's not our fault.
Do you remember the Ray Rice video in 2014?
The elevator?
Yep.
Yeah.
Where he beat the shit out of his wife?
Yep.
Do you remember what happened right before that video came out?
I don't.
He was suspended for 6 games.
Now, I remember he was suspended for 6 games.
Suspended for 6 games, and people said, well, that's really bad he did it. He was getting judged, but he's going to come back after 6 games, and people were going to move on. And by the way, Ray Rice is a guy who, to his credit, has taken full responsibility for that and done a lot of work around that and is married to that woman today. Think what you will of that, and had never done anything wrong in his life that we know of before that. So this was a awful incident, and it ruined his life because he never played again. And the reason he never played again is because we got a video leak. then people were suddenly like, I can't believe this. He needs to be banned forever. And no team ever signed him. And I'm not saying that's the wrong thing. I'm saying that's what it took for us to do it. And it's just one example of many that I could do across our history in this country.
Deshaun Watson plays for the Cleveland Browns, my home team. It's funny, and he got a 6-game suspension as well.
For now.
But, if you place a bet on a game you're not even involved in and don't play on, you'll get suspended for a year because that messes with the NFL's money. Right. And that's why why Ray Rice didn't play again.
But now imagine, let's use that example too. Imagine if there were video of these accusations that Deshaun Watson had done. He'd never play again because people would see it. And so the point is, mental injuries, we can't see.
Yep.
When someone comes home and they have 2 prosthetics and half their face is blown off, we can see that.
Yep.
We can see that. And we're like, oh, wow, what do we got to do to help that? But someone's, just walking in the grocery store and in their mind's a war, but you're just walking down aisle fucking 5. You can't see that. And so no one does anything about it.
How about this? You have a guy who has a prosthetic, burn face, all of that. And he walks into a grocery store and like, say he slips and falls, okay, because of his prosthetic. People are going to rush over and help him in all of this. Now let's imagine somebody with PTSD and a can or something, a glass bottle falls from a top shelf, makes a huge loud bang, and the dude just collapses in a ball of tears. How do you think he's going to get treated?
People are going to be real confused. Some people would help him, but it's not. I understand what you're saying. It's not the same.
A lot of people would make fun of him. Guarantee you people would probably pull out a camera. Spilling over spilled spaghetti, what have you. And a lot of that is you can't see it.
Yeah.
And one of the other things is, we have told people for forever that PTSD, shell shock, whatever you want to call it, is a chronic mental health condition that once acquired is your new normal. We can do some things to mitigate symptoms, but this is your life now. And they wonder why people put a bullet in their brain.
Right.
These are mental injuries. The U.S. government will spend millions of dollars for a soldier who gets shot to heal them and get them as good as they can. You get kicked out if you get PTSD. And this is why, on the, I'm really proud of Dan Crenshaw for putting that bill in.
Yeah, as a veteran. Mm-hmm.
He understands these are mental injuries. He's been through a lot, and the federal government has spent a lot to get him where he is. And he's still, missing an eye, etc. And he still has several issues, but anytime there's an issue, he goes and he gets and he can get help, and he wants to make sure that mental injuries are treated the same way, And a lot of it is just realizing that that's what it is. PTSD is like a gunshot wound. The only difference is instead of going and fixing it and stitching it up and all of that, they just wipe away the blood and they're like, it'll be fine. I don't know any commander who's going to accuse somebody with a broken leg of malingering. And, there's a lot of bad leadership when it comes to PTSD in the military. But also, the military is where it needs to happen for veterans, because the idea that, hey, you can no longer serve because you have PTSD and you have to get kicked out at 18 years, 2 years before your retirement check kicks in, but the VA will take care of you. And then you go over to the VA and you do, say, MDMA assisted therapy and you're perfectly fine. Why'd you have to get out? My ultimate goal would be for everyone to be healed while they're in service and never have to go to mental health at the VA. Because if you're traumatized, if you have PTSD, you should be given an opportunity to heal. And the fact that the United States military is not currently doing that, they're leaving people behind. Something we say we don't do in this country.
We do it all the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But I mean, eventually, thank God, you were able to get yourself in this opportunity, which you had to do yourself, and you had to get into a clinical trial. But you get in with these two doctors, the husband and wife, who had been working in this for years and years trying to do research. And now I guess they, as psychiatrists, they were given the responsibility of handling, I guess, parts of the study, right?
Yeah.
The overall study. Okay. So you get in with them in 2014. It was 3 sessions total, 2013,
Correct.
2015? I'm sorry, 2014 and 2015?
Correct. So I took my first dose. It was the week of Thanksgiving, which was November 22nd, because I was going to the Citadel as a Veteran Day student at the time. So I kind of worked my sessions in when I knew I wouldn't have school for a while. And so that was my first one. I did the second one right after the first of the year, and the third one in February or March. It was somewhere around there.
Okay, so when you got into the study, did you have some pre-meetings and pre-sessions with the two doctors before you did any of this?
So there's all the sessions that are like qualifications for the trial and like informed consent and that stuff, which is all FDA stuff. And then you do therapy sessions beforehand. And a lot of that is so they know what's going on and stuff like that. So they better know how to guide you. Then you do an active session, and then you do 3 integration sessions after each active session.
The active session is when you take it.
Correct.
The integration is, you're saying it's a later one?
It's a 90-minute regular talk therapy session, no MDMA or anything like that.
Right, to follow up what you had done.
And
So
that's the MDMA protocol. Psilocybin protocols, ketamine and ibogaine are different. I'm more versed in the MDMA ones.
got it. Okay, so we'll go with MDMA just to go through like the exacts on some of this stuff then. So
It's also the one I did.
right. So, and it worked. So we got.
Well, they all work, and they all work for different things. And I think that's going to be one of the more interesting things as research goes on is eventually we're going to have, a cornucopia of different things that help. Some help better than others. Like I happen to personally think MDMA is perfectly suited for PTSD in particular because of how it manifests itself.
That is exclusively what they use mostly for PTSD, though.
Oh
right?
well, no, they can also use ibogaine. I also know people who use psilocybin and other things.
I was thinking about versus psilocybin, but you do know some people who are using psilocybin for PTSD?
Yes.
Okay.
I know people who have done psilocybin assisted therapy for PTSD with the intention of healing PTSD, and it was highly effective for them. That was also not as part of a clinical trial. That was on the underground. They all work to an extent on like these different acquired mental injuries. But some work better than others. Like, for example, psilocybin's really great for depression.
Right.
MDMA, I mean, long-term while being associated with PTSD, it's effective. But as a standalone, I don't know, because the research hasn't been done. And this is where, we can find out what is the best thing, because in the future, I'd love it for people to be able to walk into a clinic and sit down and say, hey, this is the problem I'm having. And they're like, well, okay, this is what you need. And that could be, hey, it's psilocybin. Hey, it's ibogaine. Hey, it's ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT, or it's MDMA followed by a psilocybin session. Once we do the research, we'll know the best way to do it. And the truth is, different people need different things, and different things work differently on different people. So, for example, the MDMA therapy, the MAPS phase 3 results, 12% of people it didn't work on. So those people still need help. And this is why, there's a lot of people who are like, no, it's got to be psilocybin, or it's got to be this, or it's got to be... No. You know what? I know somebody who's doing, SBG, the subganglial block, the neck injection thing, and that's highly effective for them. I know somebody else who's doing that in addition to doing ketamine-assisted therapy.
What do they put in the neck injection?
I have no idea how this works. It's something that hits something that turns off PTSD in the brain for a couple of months. It's SBG, subganglial block.
Wow. Gotta look into that.
Yeah, and for some people, hyperbaric therapy works. For some people, you know what? Yoga and Tai Chi works. Others, going to church works. this is why we need a cornucopia of solutions. And depending on severity and the individual and what they're comfortable with, they can get the help they need.
So with you were one of the 88% where it was effective, and you were one of the 67% it was, right? Where it worked completely.
Interestingly enough, I still technically had PTSD at the 12-month follow-up. But I've gotten better since then.
But it was a lot less.
I was in the 21% that had a massive reduction in symptoms, almost to the point of not having it, but I still technically did. And I do believe there's some factors in that. One is I was dealing not just with Iraq trauma, but also I was abused as a child. And so I was dealing with a whole bunch of stuff throughout my whole life. And I even at the time, I was like, I kind of wish I had a fourth session. So I think that may have been a factor. The fact that it took me a very long time to believe it would be permanent is a big factor.
I heard you talking about that in the live session on the Netflix doc. You're like, I'm just worried that this isn't, one of my fears is that this is taking it away now and it's not going to last forever. And that's like the first question I have from the outside. Like when I talk with you or I talk with John Kostakopoulos, like, are you thinking that? Well, you feel great while it's happening and you're like, well, what happens when this turns off? That's what I'd be thinking.
Oh, absolutely. And it's my thoughts before and my thoughts immediately after were very different. I was terrified when I first did it, in part because I thought, again, Dare era, I was afraid like I'd see dragons and think that the therapists were insurgents and I would hurt them. That was actually a huge fear of mine. Then I did MDMA and realized that was not going to happen. So, but the other thing is, because I knew I was better, I pushed my triggers and I purposely triggered myself to find out where they were. So when they would ask me questions, have you been triggered in the past 6 weeks? Well, yeah, 3 times. Why? Because I purposely did it. So that was also a factor. Okay.
Oh, did you lose the volume right there?
Yeah, there we go.
You just got it. Yeah, you just got to turn that. Sorry. And I'll tuck it in there. Yep. You good now?
All right. There we go.
All right, cool.
Sorry about that.
No, it's good.
I totally lost where I was going.
So you were, now I'm trying to remember too, how far you got.
Oh, no, I was pushing my triggers. So
Right.
so that was part of the reason. But I would say probably between that 12 and 18 month mark is when I went completely PTSD free. And I've honestly been getting better since. And like, it's not like my life has been peaches and roses since I went through. In part because stuff happens. I've voluntarily gone and done stuff. You have things like you saw my therapy tapes on how to change your mind. A lot of media outlets want access to my therapy tapes, and I typically give it to them. But what they do is they then send me time codes, and I have to go watch my therapy tapes. And that's, watching a home movie about all the worst stuff in your life narrated by you gets interesting. It's something I would prefer not to do. In part because it reminds me of how I used to be, and I'm so happy I'm not that way anymore.
But you said something really interesting. I don't know if you realize it, but when you were talking about how a year later, when you did your 1 year checkup, you still had some.
Yeah.
So you were technically in the 21%.
Correct.
But then you just mentioned somewhere between the 12 and 18 months out, it went away and it's never come back.
Correct.
Did they re-reflect the data to put you in the fully cured?
No.
So that could mean that maybe the 12% who it didn't work for, perhaps at some point it did.
Well, so this is why MAPS is currently working on, I believe it is working on a long-term follow-up to actually get that data.
And that's Rick Doblin's organization.
Yes. And when we get the data, we'll know the answer to those questions. But a lot of people have said they've continued to heal. And it's interesting because, for some people, there's an aha moment. The 2 people who dropped out before completing the protocol, they had an aha moment. They were like, oh, I'm better. Like they processed what they needed to process and they were good. For me, in part, I think because I had so much different trauma throughout my life, it was more like Drano. if you've ever had a clogged drain, you pour Drano in, it opens up a little bit. You pour it in again, it opens up more. Pour it in again, and it clears it out. That was more my experience. It got better each time, and then I just continued to get better. Especially when I got to the point where I was like, not only does this work, but it's not diminishing in any way. Like, I'm still good. And then the universe decided to chuck a bunch of weird stuff my way, and I'm still good. Now, that doesn't mean I don't go talk to therapists when I need to, because I absolutely do. And, I don't do MDMA or any of that kind of therapy. I just call up and process with a therapist, in part because I learned that keeping that shit in, it rots your brain and causes PTSD. And so I deal with it. And it's hard and it's awkward. And, it actually would be a lot easier if I did do like MDMA, but that's also not legal. So I've only done MDMA 3 times in my life.
And that was part of 3 sessions.
Just those 3 sessions. And
what happens in those sessions? Can you take me inside the room? So like your first one, you go in, you have the 2 doctors who, again, as you said, you've already met with, you've already had some sessions with, talk about this, go through everything to expect, all the things that happen in your life as well, so that they have an understanding. But again, people can see this on the documentary. It's very compelling stuff. But you go onto a bed, they're seated right next to you. You're in a room at a given clinic place, I guess, where you're doing this. And do you just sit down right away and they give you a pill and then they wait for it to set in? Like, how does it go?
So now some of the stuff is entirely because it's a clinical trial. So like I showed up, they handed me a cup to piss in, because you have to be off all your mental health meds and you can't use cannabis or anything like that. And like specifically being on SSRIs is bad, and they'll work with you. So they had to work with me for a while to get me off meds and things like that.
I was going to say, that's a whole process in and of itself.
Like a month-long process.
Wow.
So, everything's good. Go, I brought my own blanket and pillow and stuff. So, go in, then they hook me up to like a heart monitor and a pulse ox monitor and like all these things that, to be honest, like there's no reason for a pulse ox monitor other than the FDA says so. At least, there could entirely be a legitimate reason. I'm just saying I couldn't figure it out. And there's some of these things that they have to monitor because the FDA says so that probably would not happen in an actual therapy session. But yeah, they're like, are you ready? They got this little dish, and like I kept hoping it was going to be a red. Like they give me 2 choices: a red pill and a blue pill. like the Matrix. One's the placebo, one's the real one, and you decide.
Were there any placebos in this study for
Yes.
other people? Okay, so you didn't know if you were going to get it or not.
Correct.
Same deal. Okay.
Yeah, this is a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized clinical research trial. So I didn't know, and the interesting thing is the people is to also typically, you look at a placebo and it doesn't really do anything. Well, in this case, it does. And there's a reason. Because you're still doing like 80 hours of therapy and you're doing 3 8-hour therapy sessions. That in and of itself actually has helped a lot of people. Upwards of, I believe, 30% had large reductions in symptoms in the placebo group. And actually, believe it or not, there was one individual in the placebo group who felt so much better that he went out and was talking about it because they hadn't broken the blind, and he fully believed that he had taken MDMA.
Whoa.
And he was better. Now, everyone who's in the placebo group, there's what's known as crossover. So because Rick, Doblin, the board, and the people at MAPS believe that it is wrong to allow someone to continue to suffer, if the people who got the placebo are given the opportunity to do a full dose. So if they do the placebo and it's determined they did the placebo, they are given the opportunity to then go through the whole thing again, but using MDMA.
That's cool.
Yeah,
because it was different when I had John Costacopoulos in here, who it was different for his. He had it was psilocybin in his case, and he had 3 sessions. And people who had gotten the placebo in the first session got it again in the second, and then they would give them the real thing only in the third. So it better work on one session or it doesn't work
Yeah.
out.
So in the phase, I'm not 100% sure on phase 3 where they break the blind. So I won't discuss that. But in my case, in the phase 2 study, they broke the blind between the second and third session. Now, interestingly enough, there was 3 separate dosage levels in my trial. So some people got placebo. Some people got low dose, which was, I believe, 75 or 80 milligrams. And then some people got 125, which was the high dose. So both me and Michael and Annie, the therapists, we all thought I got the low dose. And then it turns out I got the 125.
Why did you guys think that?
Well, so I had no frame of reference because I had only done like cannabis. So like I'd never done MDMA, so I didn't know what good or bad dosage or anything. So like, but they even based on their reaction thought I was low dose. But also on the few times I've taken psilocybin, I've had some interesting reactions. I've done ayahuasca twice and it did absolutely nothing. I'm probably one of the only people that will sit in this chair and ever say those words.
She dabbled around a little bit after this.
Well, so I only do psychedelics in a legal sense. So the 2 ayahuasca ceremonies I did through a church that has Supreme Court permission to do it here in the United States. And then
That sounds complicated.
it was when they were going through the courts, but they have permission.
Okay.
And so, and then there are places in the United States where psilocybin has been decriminalized. Washington, D.C. being one of them.
Really?
Initiative 81.
That's promising.
One with overwhelming support, actually. But
So
it's
what-
only plant-based psychedelics.
What did you want to try that because you had done this other stuff and you figure what the fuck?
Kind of, yeah. So one of the things is, there's nothing preventing me from doing MDMA again other than myself and the fact that, like, I get asked about addiction a lot. Like, well, if we give people MDMA, they're going to get addicted. Well, no, they're not.
You haven't heard that at all from this?
Oh, yeah. And part of this is, like, if you go do something and go to a rave and meet a girl and have a great night and all of this, I entirely get why you'd wake up the next morning and be like, I totally want to do this again. I went through all the worst trauma in my life and was processing it. It's not traumatic, like, say, prolonged exposure therapy and some of these others treatments are. But it's a lot of hard work, and it's not fun. You know, one of the funny analogies I use up on Capitol Hill all the time, in part because so many people up there are 9,000 years old. I mean, I didn't realize that when we elected Congress for the first time in 1790 that, like, that was it. That was our Congress for forever.
That's good.
I don't think the founding fathers planned it that way either. But I use colonoscopies actually because there's actually a really good equivalency there. It's a necessary procedure to prevent very bad things from happening. You've got specially trained people. They give you very powerful drugs to knock you out. You go through a very uncomfortable procedure. And then, you know what? When you're coming out of it in the recovery room, yeah, you might feel a little loopy. You might feel some interesting sensations and things like that. But, you know, I don't know anybody who's ever woken up the next day and be like, dude, that anesthesia was so awesome. I totally need to schedule another colonoscopy. It's the same thing.
It's a good way to look at it.
So, like, that's why I'm like, that's fine. I mean, I will one day use it recreationally and will, in part, these things will eventually all be legalized and then I'll be able to, like, have the spiritual stuff. But
I think we're headed that way for sure with this. Yeah.
yeah, and it's kind of funny because, you know, Rick Doblin knew my rule of, I don't, you know, I do use cannabis for pain control and things like that, as well as to help me sleep sometimes. But, you know, he knew my rules and he called me up one day and he's like, if you could do ayahuasca legally, would you? I'm like, you'd have to entirely explain to me what you mean by legally and how that works. But yes, I'm interested. And so he introduced me, and I went and I did it twice. And they really want me to come back. And they're like, we're going to give you more next time and see if we can get this to work. But, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's because my body processes things quicker than others. I don't know if it's related to my TBI, but.
You didn't really feel anything.
I felt nothing. I sat there for 4 hours watching everybody lose their minds. Well, I won't say lose their minds, but to me, you know, when you're rolling on the floor and puking and shitting and stuff like that, like, I mean, ayahuasca ceremonies are not pretty. And they're very, very helpful. They're just, if you're the sober dude in the room.
Yeah, people freak out.
Like, yeah. And, you know, I'm glad everybody else that I did it with, you know, got healing and it benefited them. And that's fantastic. I just sat there and I'm like, this is weird. And I was like, there's something wrong with me. This isn't weird. I'm like, for a minute, it was kind of funny. I was like, what if this is what everyone feels like and everybody made all this shit up? Like, I'm like, this is so weird. And I'm like, yeah, I felt nothing. The second time they gave me a double dose, actually, and still the same thing. Now, part of it is I actually think I know why.
Why?
So one of the things with ayahuasca ceremonies is frequently, because they're done in a religious context, everyone does it. And me being kind of a protector warrior, like anybody who's been out with me, you know, I don't get so drunk that I can't react if like somebody in my group or party needs help. It's just the way I am. And so like, for example, for my birthday every year, it asked my brother-in-law, John Rice to I'm like, all right, you stay sober. I get shit faced as I want because I don't feel comfortable relinquishing that control unless I know everyone's safe. And if nobody else is going to take on that mantle, I will. So I think part of the reason I had no effect is because my mind had a hard time letting go because nobody was sober. Everybody was on ayahuasca.
Including the people who were administering.
Correct. And so, and I actually had a lengthy conversation with the people about this. And I'm like, my concern here is it's not that I'm worried about the ayahuasca. It's not. My worry is, hey, if somebody gets up because they have to use the bathroom, because anybody who's done ayahuasca knows that happens, and they're unsteady on their feet and they fall and crack their head open on a coffee table.
Yeah.
One of the things is the headline's going to be woman dies at ayahuasca ceremony, not woman trips and falls.
Yeah, this one sounds really irresponsible if every single person in there is on it.
And I'm like, I would feel better if there was, you know, a sober safety.
Yes.
And it was interesting that I got pushback. They're like, no, this isn't how they do it, you know, in the jungle.
Fuck the jungle. You have to worry about headlines. That is what people will hear about, the one body that drops, and they'll design the whole thing around it.
It's actually one of the concerns I have with the spread of decrim and the spread of availability is that people don't practice harm reduction. They don't know how to use these things safely and effectively.
Right.
And the more negative consequences and bad outcomes, that's how MDMA got banned in the first place.
Correct.
All these things got banned in the first place because of bad outcomes and improper harm reduction. But I think my brain just wouldn't let go. The funny part is I brought it up and I talked about it and they're like, oh, you just need to come down. You come down to Peru, you know, you'll see people do it and then they go chop down trees with axes. And I'm like, dude, if I don't feel comfortable in like a house doing ayahuasca because someone might trip and fall, having people swinging axes is not going to make me feel better.
Yeah, that's not responsible.
And this is another thing. There's a lot of people who claim that they're doing these things for mental health. But if you're not doing the integration, you're not doing the work, that's not what this is about. You're trading one addiction for another. And that's a problem.
I'm very glad to see you use a good foil here that you also have personal experience with looking at the situation, because it is something I worry about in these conversations. And I have thought about the whole legalize everything argument. It's not something I'm like,
There's a difference between legalize everything and decriminalize everything. There's a huge difference. And this is a conversation that
Can you define that difference?
So decriminalization means it's not a crime, meaning let's sell it out of the back of trucks on the side of the road like rutabagas. So, for example, lettuce, decriminalized. Literally anybody can grow lettuce and go sell it.
Yeah, but that's like lettuce. You eat it.
Understand. So legalization, think Sudafed. So one of the issues I have with decriminalization is the biggest argument, in my opinion, for full drug legalization, like 100% legal equivalent to like alcohol.
Yeah.
Is honestly the fact that foreign actors are using the drug war to wage war with drugs, fentanyl.
But wouldn't that, if you legalized it, wouldn't you also be able to have FDA-approved industries produce it?
Correct, which would mean they would be manufactured under good manufacturing practices.
Right.
I don't know anybody who goes to CVS, buys Advil, and thinks it's laced with fentanyl.
Right, exactly.
So if you have a situation, let's take heroin, where you go to some CVS and you go to the pharmacy and you show your ID like you do with Sudafed, and you buy a gram of heroin. You know, Carl Hart, Dr. Carl Hart, professor, and if I'm downgrading him by calling him a professor, I apologize, up at Columbia University. Most people who use drugs don't have a problem. There's a lot of people who can go out and say, do cocaine on a Friday night or do heroin on a Friday night and not have an issue.
Heroin? Heroin. Most people who do heroin.
90% of people who do heroin have no negative outcome. Now that's individual time they use it.
Right, but when you're saying don't have a problem, that takes it much farther than no negative outcome, because negative outcome with heroin is you die.
Correct.
Right, but the people who are using heroin by and large, because like I know Carl Hart's talked about like he
Before
uses
OxyContin, how many opiate overdoses were there a year? Roughly 3,000. The deaths are coming from things being adulterated.
Right, but still, hold on, let's not get off this. With heroin, even if it was low on the number of people who were actually like full-blown dying, it's such an addictive, physically and mentally altering drug that there are often people who end up homeless and living in a box somewhere, you know, for shelter because they're using heroin.
Correct.
See, that's an issue. So like people don't use...
And I don't disagree that is an issue. I'm fully prepared to deal with that issue. And if we don't spend trillions of dollars on a drug war, guess what we have to be able to help that? I view addiction, you know, growing up, actually, my oldest brother started using heroin at about age 12.
Age 12?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
By the way, affluent suburb of Cleveland. He got it from the kid of a doctor who lived up the street.
Who had heroin?
Yep.
The doctor had heroin.
Yep.
For what?
I don't know. But
fuck.
So, and actually my oldest brother was one of my abusers. So when he was high, I personally witnessed how bad addiction is. I also view it as a medical issue. Because guess what? Most addiction, I know exactly why my brother started using drugs. Because we were abused as kids, and he wanted to make it go away. And the heroin allowed that. So,
I agree. It is a medical issue.
So
yeah, if I was arguing against that, that's not what I meant at all.
No. And here's the thing. Just because I think you should be able to go to CVS and buy 100% like tested and like 100% pure heroin manufactured to FDA standards. And I believe this for all the drugs, by the way. Doesn't mean I think people should abuse it. Doesn't mean I don't think people should do harm reduction. I think if we sell alcohol, and alcohol causes a whole bunch of problems.
Right.
And we deal with those problems. Like, I don't think you should do heroin and drive. I think driving under the influence should always be illegal.
Oh, okay. Hold on, though. With heroin, though, again, because with the Carl Hart guy, I've heard pieces of his arguments. I still haven't sat down and listened to a full podcast of it because it is actually a little bit of a bridge too far for me. I do have to sit down and listen to the whole goddamn thing.
It was a very bitter pill for me to swallow, but I'll tell you, when you have 120,000 Americans who die because a foreign government is injecting fentanyl into the drug supply, that's a problem.
I'm not arguing that, but I'm saying when we start to, because again, I'm not saying I'm shutting down this argument of like whether you get I don't want to say the wrong thing, but legalization or decriminalization. The point is like it's available and you can buy it in CVS, whatever that is. I'm not shutting that down, but I'm saying like the difference between snorting heroin and having a couple beers, there's no comparison. Heroin is a totally, like, people abuse the fuck out of alcohol. They become alcoholics. Some people die from it. Very real.
Same with heroin.
Yes, but I'm saying a little bit of heroin becomes a major addiction for, I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but when you try heroin, chances are you're doing it again and you're going to have a big problem with it. It's not like having a beer. These are two very different things.
So one, doing it once and saying that you will do it again doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. If you go have a beer, that doesn't mean you won't go have a beer that in a week. Okay.
Right.
If we're talking about abuse and addiction, that is different than use. And I think part of the problem that we have is too many people confuse abuse and addiction with use.
Okay, so here's the question.
Yes.
Alcohol use.
Yes.
Someone who's not an alcoholic drinks alcohol. I drink alcohol. I'm an alcohol user in that case.
Correct.
100%. How many heroin users are in any way functional? What percentage? It's low. It's low.
Define a heroin user. Are we talking daily or are we talking, hey, you know what? I'm going to buy
once a week.
Actually, at once a week, you'd be surprised.
But if I'm surprised, is it 20%?
It's probably like 80.
80, you're telling me 80% of people use heroin once a week. They're perfectly fine.
They're not abusing or don't have abuse or addiction.
All right, I need to look into this more off the podcast because I just don't. That is one, like, there's cocaine. Totally agree with you. Cocaine. Everyone I know.
But also here's the other thing. Why do people keep? If you ask most heroin addicts, what did they start taking?
Alcohol.
Prescription drugs, prescription opiates.
Okay, that makes sense.
And they got hooked because they were told by their doctor, take all these pills 24/7 for months and months on end, and then they get cut off and they turn to heroin. There's a big difference between having the pharmaceutical industry purposely get people addicted, and then they go use heroin. And yes, those people's lives were absolutely destroyed, and I'll say it right here. The Sacklers with Purdue Pharma should be in jail for what they did.
Agreed.
But, so let's take that out of the equation for a second. They get addicted because, see, here's the thing. Go back to the alcohol. If you were required to do a shot of alcohol every hour or 2 shots of alcohol every hour that you're awake.
Oh, you're fucked.
For a year or 2 years. How about this? When I got out of the Marine Corps in 1999, I had a bit of a back issue. Got way worse in Iraq, but I had a problem with my back. And I went to the VA. I said, hey, I got a problem with my back. They're like, what happened? I'm like, well, there was this time, I was lifting a 463L pallet with a dude, and he dropped it and didn't say he was going to drop it. And so I took the full weight of it, and like my back's been kind of fucked up since. I'm like, okay. Here's your prescription. You can pick it up at the pharmacy. They gave me 3 giant bottles of Vicodin. Mm-hmm. And this is the thing. When we talk about addiction and abuse, we need to factor these things in.
Yeah, totally. This argument you're making, could not agree with you more.
Because, see, here's the funny thing. When we're talking opiates, to be honest, it really doesn't matter whether it's heroin, Oxycontin, Vicodin, Percocet. They're all opiates. They all have the same effect. As far as on the body, dosages are different between them, but the same effect. Do you have any idea how many people in this country will pop a Percocet on a Friday night before they go out?
It's a lot more than we consciously realize, but it's a lot.
And this is where, like, that's literally what we're talking about when we're talking about heroin. You know, the interesting thing about heroin addicts, and like, I'll be honest, I didn't know any of this until I started researching it. And a lot of this was, I was like, I started looking at the opiate epidemic, and I saw what China was doing. And I'm like, my brain kept going to, damn it, we got to legalize it. And, you know, I'll tell you, Howard, with an organization called COPS, which is like Cops Against Prohibition or something like that, he'll love that I'm talking about legalizing heroin. But look, we have a drug war. The question is, like, it's kind of funny. All the people who have issues with civil liberties because of the Patriot Act, everything in the Patriot Act was completely legal before that, as long as it involved drugs. Drugs have done the drug war in and of itself has caused so many problems. The problems that drugs lead to can be, especially because we've gotten better as humanity. We know what addiction is.
Right.
We know some places to help. I mean, part of the problem we have with addiction is the fact that the addiction rehab industry is a pump and dump money making scheme where they heal people. They sober them up to go out and use again, so that they'll come back because health insurance keeps paying for it. This is why I'd rather them go to Mexico and do Ibogaine or, you know, MDMA therapy or anything to heal that underlying trauma that's causing the addiction. Because guess what? People like to feel loopy. Whether it's cannabis or alcohol or what have you. And the idea that something should be illegal because of negative health consequences. I'm a smoker, man. Smoking's more addictive than heroin. Kills 500,000 people a year. Completely legal. We have made a conscious decision to allow people to smoke, to tax it, and to, try to mitigate consequences.
And this is where the argument is, and this is why I say, like, I'm open to that. Like, I'm not someone who shuts down the legalize everything or whatever.
But decrim, I view decrim as something different, because what decrim is there's nothing about purity. There's nothing about quality control. There's no mandated harm reduction. There's no safe use spaces. There's none of this. It's just decrim is everything we have now. You just don't get arrested for it. That's literally what.
Right.
And
right.
Because of the fact that the drug supply in the United States has been polluted.
Which is a great argument for, I don't disagree with that. The way we got into this, though, was talking about the ayahuasca ceremony and your very valid concerns about them fucking it up for everybody else. I had brought that up as an aside, like, yeah, like as someone who's not like against the idea of talking about like legalization or decrim, whatever you want to say.
Well, this is where if you have legalization, you can say, hey, if you're going to do a ceremony like this, you must have A, B, C, X, Y, Z. You know,
my point is, we're never going to get there if we are careless with the little inches we get on the board.
Yes.
So it's what I was trying to say there 10 minutes ago or whatever it was that is something that you want to make sure of with all this, including MDMA and things like that. Because once we get people, the first person who takes psilocybin and try to treat something on their own and thinks they can fly and dies, they're going to make the headline out of that. Like, I always use this example. I remind people, the first self-driving...
Insurrection shaman. Why is he called that? Because he talked about doing mushrooms.
Insurrection shaman.
The dude with the horns and the fur and the painted face.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Not that guy. But
No. One. So there are two people. One was actually very recently, and the other is Insurrection Shaman. Insurrection Shaman said, and I have no reason to doubt him, that he uses mushrooms all the time.
I have no reason to doubt him either.
The second one was actually very recently. Aaron Rodgers came out and said he did ayahuasca.
Yes. Saw that.
And I had everybody and their brother message that to me. And they're like, what do you think about this? This is Aaron Rodgers. Like, yeah, I've been saying since I first did psychedelics that this doesn't make you a hippie, peacenik, like pacifist. And this is where I get frustrated when people say, oh, we just need to do some water supply. No. First off, I believe that giving somebody something without their knowledge or against their will is wrong, always.
Yes.
100%. But also, you know, like, they can help. But also, if you don't have the proper set and setting, they can cause problems. And this is where, you know, some of my fears with decriminalization is, you know, we've talked before on here about how it's therapy coupled with a tool called a psychedelic. And there's so many people who are so used to the Western model of, I take a Zoloft, it makes me better, that they think they can just go take it and they'll be better.
Right.
And that leads to negative outcomes. There's a whole bunch of stuff that, like, if you have legalization, if you have medicalization and you have these things, you can prevent a lot of harm. The problem is we have none of that. And anybody who reaches out for help because they're having an issue with drugs gets arrested. If
Huge problem.
You know,
Agreed.
if somebody's
Agreed.
having a bad is having a hard time on psychedelics, you know, what we used to call a bad trip, I would much rather them call someone at Zendo and get talked through it than have cops show up and shoot them.
I don't disagree at all. I think that this is the part of the argument when people are still talking about, like, equating drug use with criminal behavior. I'm like, dude, that is such a 1985 argument.
But
like,
there's
it's
still
crazy.
There's still people who believe that the fentanyl epidemic would be solved if people just didn't do drugs.
That's way too. I mean, we have 350 million people in this country. The idea that people are going to be like you and don't have interest in things and don't have problems or don't have reasons or whatever is insane. I agree with you. So it's important that we have the conversations, especially around people that people can get behind easier, like veterans. Like, when veterans speak up about stuff like this, I mean, that's why you have some right-wing support for this stuff, because they're like, wait a second, hold on a minute. All the Navy SEALs, for example, and operators are coming to their constituents where, you know, they usually lean more right, and so they're going to their, as constituents, they're going to their representatives and saying, this is working for me, and I have to go to fucking Mexico right now to do it. We need to bring it here.
Or they're running for office now.
Or they're running for office.
Like Morgan Luttrell.
Yeah, yeah. So when they do that, you know, it gives it a good light, and I always want to make sure to give it the best light. So I want to make sure I
wish the
point out
people
where we could go down the
wanted it
wrong
to be-
lane.
Yeah, and that's a concern of mine, and a lot of it's optics. You know,
It's all optics. Yes.
and one of my favorite questions to ask people who are involved in this is, if you could have every single thing change you want in drug policy in 5 years, but you couldn't use any drugs, and if you did, you lost it all permanently. Or you could do drugs and get everything you want, but it'd take 15. Which would you do? And I find it interesting who says 15 and who says 5.
Who does?
I'm not going to give names on that.
Right. But what types of people?
There's people who are in this because for the people who need it, and there's people in it for the people who want it. And
Wow,
the problem I have is when the people who want it are willing to sacrifice the people who need it. Because I'll be honest, I don't know anybody who needs it that is wanting to sacrifice people who want it. They'd love for everybody, but our system, unfortunately, means we have to use incrementalism. And I've never said, like, and there's certain areas where I do draw lines. Like, I have never once in a million, and I never will say, this should be reserved only for veterans. No. But what I'm saying is, I see what happened with medical cannabis. Because can a veteran get a cannabis prescription from the VA?
I assume no.
The answer is no. A lot of veterans can't even afford it because they just decriminalized it and legalized it, which means, hey, the people who work in government jobs can't do it. You know, the lady who's 65 and should retire with her arthritis, who cleans buildings in D.C., but is still working because she's putting her granddaughter through college, whose doctor says with your arthritis, you should really, your best bet is cannabis. But you know what? She can't afford the $250 a month. So she gets a prescription for Percocet because it's $5. And so this is the problem when you say, when you do things the way I see the psychedelic movement going, and how cannabis did it. Because all the people that they use to get it passed can't get it. But you know what? All the people that were pushing for it absolutely can. And so, if you just say, okay, forget all this FDA stuff, screw that. Let's just decriminalize it. Okay, cool. No veteran can go to the VA and do it. And won't be allowed under DOD. People who don't have the ability to pay for 60 hours of therapy time don't get it. But the people who want it, and the funny thing is, the people who want it are still going to get it, because right now you can go out to Hollywood, you can go out to Aspen. There's parties with any drug you want.
Absolutely.
And they get it, but a veteran can't. Or the guy who's a veteran who works at the post office knows he'll get fired if he goes and gets healed. And this is why there needs to be a legal route versus decrim, because of how the system works. But a lot, we saw it in cannabis. We're still fighting. The NDAA that just passed the House includes a bunch of stuff on research for cannabis at the VA, because the VA still won't prescribe it. They're not even allowed to sign an authorization, which means if a veteran wants to get a cannabis card, not only do they have to pay for the cannabis card, they also have to go pay for a doctor outside to do the evaluation. And then they have to deal with the VA, which will no longer prescribe them any Schedule II narcotics, period. So we've got those problems don't get fixed through decriminalization. Legalization does. Medicalization does. And you know what? Yeah. I don't have any issues if somebody wants to go do MDMA on a Friday night. I don't have issues if somebody wants to go do mushrooms. But you know what? Their ability to do that and not worry about getting arrested should not compromise the ability of a veteran to get MDMA-assisted therapy within the VA.
Oh, that's really... The whole thing there was well said. That's really well put, though, right there.
And the other problem, honestly, is partisanship over progress.
Oh, that's always a problem on stuff.
I'll work with anybody because I believe in progress.
And you have.
And I have.
If I'm not mistaken, like, you've literally talked to, like, all these people.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've talked to Joe Biden and I talked to Donald Trump about this issue. I've talked to Rand Paul and Cory Booker. I've talked to, who actually both just co-sponsored a Right to Try Act involving Schedule I narcotics in cancer patients.
Wow.
Both sides of the aisle. Dan Crenshaw and AOC both had amendments in the NDAA that cleared the House, instructing the Department of Defense to fund or conduct clinical research trials using active duty and MDMA, psilocybin, ibogaine, and or 5-MeO-DMT for PTSD. That's how you get it for everyone.
Yes.
This idea, well, if you just decriminalize it, everyone will get it. No, the people who want it will get it. The people who need it won't. And that's a problem.
And they're also, the examples you're pointing to, as it pertains to, like, the psychedelics, they are legalizing it through the medical tracks where it's controlled environments.
Not everywhere.
How so?
Oakland, D.C., Denver have all decriminalized psilocybin or plant-based psychedelics.
Right. I'm talking about the bills that you that stuff, though. When we're talking about Democrats and Republicans working together, they are looking at it like Crenshaw, for example, is looking through all his friends who were in the Navy SEALs with him, the Marines and everything, who have gone to Mexico and done these MDMA treatments. And he's like, all right, well, let's be able to get that here. That's great. Because now, like, this is where you don't get... Like, the way they did your experience was, as far as I can tell, as a layperson looking through it, incredibly well set up. You had sober psychiatrists on there. You had a known controlled dose. You had a clear environment that was set up. You had 3 times to go in there. You knew what the expectations were. You knew the full what the drug is comprised of. The drug is not something.
And all of that also makes it a lot easier to talk about that with people like Dan Crenshaw.
Yes.
Because, the other thing that medical cannabis, and again, I used cannabis. I'm not opposed to medical cannabis. I have my issues with the politics involving cannabis. Cannabis, they think that psychedelics for mental health is the same as medical cannabis, where they just give you a card and you can do all the psychedelics you want, wherever you want, however you want. And that's not how it works. And once they get past that,
right,
they start listening. But also, if you look at all the movement in the states to decriminalize. Is that being done for, to help the people who truly need it? Because I can tell you what happened in Washington, D.C. Initiative 81 used veterans to pass it. And as soon as it passed, they were delivering mushrooms through the weed delivery services, and all the promises about opening clinics and doing all these therapy sessions with veterans have never materialized. And that's the frustrating part. And it's either partisanship that stops it, or it's this idea of this only helps the people who need it, and it's not expanding to include the people that I want, so this isn't a good thing.
And that's always going to be a lingering problem. So as a realist, I look at this and I say, okay, well, what do we need to do to get the most basic high-level things through as fast as possible? Example of a basic high-level thing: getting treatment available for MDMA with psychiatrists for veterans suffering from PTSD. It's easy.
There's three things that Republicans are pretty down for when it comes to psychedelics. Funding for research, which would include training therapists, reducing barriers to research, depending on the barrier and the justification, because they put a whole bunch of really high barriers to some stuff that really don't need to be that big. Mm-hmm. Like, do you really need 15 cameras on a safe with one MDMA pill in it? Like, it's kind of weird. And then expediting access to approved therapies. Republicans support that. It's kind of interesting. Last year, you had Representative Ocasio-Cortez introduce an amendment to the Labor Age bill that would remove the prohibition on spending federal tax dollars on Schedule I legalization efforts.
Okay.
There is an exemption in that section to allow medical research, but it was used as to prevent research once upon a time, which is no longer currently happening. NIH has actually issued multiple grants for psilocybin research. But she put this amendment in. The Republicans opposed it. She did the same thing in 2019. And actually, the bill was co-sponsored by Matt Gaetz.
He co-sponsored a bill with AOC?
Yeah, 2019.
I think hell just froze over.
On psychedelics.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, the AOC's amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act that just passed through the House was written by Matt Gaetz's office.
Wow.
He sent it to her to see if she would co-sponsor. She never responded, and then filed the bill under her name as well. So something that's really funny, I may have to send it to you, is the video of Matt Gaetz testifying in the Rules Committee on his psychedelic bill. He actually does whatever else, he actually in that speech does a really good job talking about psychedelics. And then it gets really funny because he starts talking about, he's like, my bill's, I think, 33 and hers is 337. He's like, I don't care which one you vote for as long as it makes it through.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that was kind of funny. But when AOC had this 507 amendment, in 2019, the Republican response was drugs are bad. In 2021, the answer was, no, you're absolutely correct. Psychedelics do help with mental health. They should be funded by the government. We just think your amendment isn't the way to do it. That's a sea change. Now, here's the funny part. All the reporting was congratulating AOC on her bill not passing because she increased the number of people who voted for it from the previous time, and nobody mentioned anything about a 3-star Marine Corps general standing on the House floor saying that psychedelics were a good thing.
That would have been really important to know.
And this is what I mean by partisanship over progress. It's about cheering on your allies and preventing things you truly claim to support because the wrong party's doing it.
When you've been sitting in there though with these left and right wing politicians, and you have meetings with them. Mm-hmm. You've had meetings with the biggest names like Trump and Biden. Let's start there. Do you feel like what you're saying is getting heard, or this is just a regular go through the motions?
So Trump and Biden, I think it was go through the motions. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump, I wanted to talk about psychedelics. He wanted to talk about my wife's dress. I mean, a lot of it depends on who we're talking about, though. So let's compare that to Senator Rand Paul. I met him, 2 days after I got out of the hospital, after slitting my wrists at the Citadel. He came to give a greater issue speech. When I was in the hospital, I came up with this idea to help people with PTSD and cognitive impairment get some 6 extra months of GI bills so they could actually finish their degree. So I wrote this whole thing up and I gave it to him, and he saw the bandages on my wrist, and he said, "Oh, what happened?" I since later found out he thought I was going to say I cut myself in the kitchen or burned myself on a car or something like that. And I'm like, I slit my wrist 10 days ago. He stopped what he was doing. He took his right-hand man, Sergio Gore, with him. And all 3 of us went behind this heavy curtain, and the first words out of Rand Paul's mouth was, "Forget I'm a senator, I'm a doctor, and I want to know what's going on right now." I've had I've had multiple conversations with Senator Paul about this issue. He absolutely listens. Now, one of his issues is the cost, because it's Rand Paul, and he doesn't like to spend any government money. Right. But also these, on certain things, specifically veterans, he does. And his father's a veteran. It all honestly depends. Some people, I can tell, they're just going through the motions. They had to take a meeting. And I'll tell you, actually, the biggest tell is when I make a meeting with an office, who they have me meet with. If they have me meet with a legislative correspondent in the hallway, they're not taking it seriously. If I'm having a conversation with the comms director, legislative director, or the elected representative, they are taking it seriously. Dan Crenshaw takes it seriously. I know that for a fact. Now, granted, I first talked to Dan Crenshaw about psychedelics in my elevator because he was my neighbor.
Really?
Yes.
When was that?
That was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. About a year and a half ago.
And how did that strike up? Like that combo?
He was in the elevator, and he's very recognizable.
Yeah, he is.
I knew exactly who he was, and so I was like, "Hey, sir, have you ever heard of using psychedelics to treat PTSD?" And I gave my 30-second, elevator pitch.
And I assume he had been familiar with it at that point. And
the interesting thing was he was in the elevator because he was coming home after he had talked to a Marine friend of his who had just gotten back from Mexico. Well, from overseas. I don't know if it was actually Mexico, Costa Rica, Peru.
Yeah.
And it's funny because last year he publicly supported psychedelics for the first time at Rice University Health Innovation Summit in Houston, Texas, inside his district. So it was a district constituent event, and he actually said point blank, I'd just gotten home from talking to this Marine who was talking about doing psychedelics, and it helped his PTSD. And then here's this random neighbor of mine, who's crazy and, pulls out the scars on his wrist and starts talking about how he doesn't have PTSD anymore. And that was a sign. And he's like, that's a sign to me that I need to do something about this. And actually his office has been fantastic.
That's great.
It depends on who it is. Some people absolutely do. Others, they don't.
What is refreshing though is you're having hits You're having hits and misses on both sides.
Yes.
That's great. And eventually you get enough momentum, they're all going to have to come around. I mean, data is data, man. But like when you're talking about the work that you do, because what's the name of your company? You consult on this for a bunch of places, right?
Yeah, Lubecky Strategic Direction.
Okay, so you consult for several different major outlets, which I believe...
All involving psychedelics.
And that includes like John Costacopoulos' Apollo Pact, and then MAPS as well, right?
Correct.
Who else?
So I'm also currently advising vets, veterans, exploring treatment solutions. And I also do some smaller advising to different veterans groups that are trying to get involved more in the psychedelic space, but really don't understand. They know it works. They just don't know anything else about it. So I do some advising there. But, it's coming around. You've got to have both sides. And this is why I've never heard anybody on the right say, no, don't work with Democrats on this. I've never heard them say, this needs to be our thing. I have absolutely heard that with Democrats.
That sucks.
It does. But also, can I be honest? That's on this issue. We can pick other issues and it'd be exactly reversed. But
I'm not surprised. It just sucks.
But also, there's Democrats that I have talked to who have point blank said, I will literally do anything you want me to do that you can get a Republican to sign off on.
Well, that's good. So those are the people that need to run point on this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, politics sucks with that. But I think, it's...
But we can fix politics if we can heal trauma in people when it happens. Because how many people that, think of somebody who right now in your head, and it doesn't matter who, this is for the audience at home too, think of somebody you think's a bad person. Now, ask yourself, why are they a bad person? Not why do you think they're a bad person, but why? How do you think they became that person? And so imagine if they had been able, let's say it's because they were abused as a child. Okay. So when they're taken out of that abusive home, we can heal them. And then they're not traumatized. And, then they grow up and they go to college and they get married. Let's say they find out their wife's cheating on them. And then they go do some psilocybin and deal with that grief. And they go meet somebody else. And then they decide to run for office. Like when people aren't making decisions based on trauma, they make better decisions.
It's a good argument.
Most of our political decisions are entirely emotionally based.
And that's not, hold on a second. That's not even, this makes the point better. That's not even necessarily trauma in that case. It's reactionary, which you form reactionary opinions that go in whatever direction they do, left, right, or indifferent. And that could be based on, or is actually almost always based on, your own life experiences, which could then tie in things that may be traumatic for you. So it's like a full circle right there. I see what you're saying. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, when Donald Trump was young, his brother died of alcoholism.
Yeah.
We've seen how his father treated him and ignored him in all of this. Why do you think he always needs people to pay attention to him? Imagine if that trauma had been fixed earlier. He'd probably be a richer person.
Could be,
both financially as well as a human. And this is the thing. It's funny. I think some of the right's concern is because the counterculture consistently says, "Oh, all you got to do is just drop LSD and you'll become a hippie peacenik, and it'll all be love and rainbows." And I'm like, that's not how this works.
No.
There is an amplifier effect. We saw that with Insurrection Shaman. Like, these can have bad outcomes. We know this. And this is where, if everything is on the up and up, we can mitigate bad outcomes. We can do harm reduction. We can do things. Simple things like, one of the reasons that MDMA was originally banned was because people died because they didn't drink enough water. and then
Yes.
went out and partied and danced and sweated in a hot environment and all of this. So when I did it, one of the things for harm reduction is they make sure the therapists, one of their jobs is to make sure you drink water. Or in my case, it was grape Powerade, but
Controlled medical environment. Safety at the forefront, professionals right there, professionals an active part of the process too, because you're talking with them and talking through this experience, which, by the way, how long? It was 8 hours, the full trip and session?
yeah.
How long were the effects available? Like, when did they start to taper?
So it took about 45 minutes to kick in. And then 2 hours in, you take a booster dose, which doesn't I hate using these words, but it doesn't make you higher. It just extends the therapeutic range. Because one of the goals with MDMA therapy is, you can't be too whacked out of cord, and if there's not enough, it doesn't work. So there's this therapeutic range that allows the healing to occur. But, again, you can have harm reduction. You can have all these things we're talking about in a non-medical environment if everything's above board. How about this? How many people, I hate going back to heroin, but how many people die of a heroin overdose because the people they're with are scared to call the police or an ambulance?
Probably a good number.
I mean,
And the argument there is getting to that point and what leads to that, for sure. But yes, probably a good number.
but most of the people who are addicted to heroin in the United States it was started on prescriptions.
And I agree. That's a huge, huge issue. The whole legalized opiate side of it with Oxy and all that. That's.
But
I
also,
got a lot of thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing. Most people don't use drugs that way. They got them addicted, and then they took the pills away, and then they turned to street stuff. Most people who use drugs recreationally don't use them that way.
Yeah, I just don't know. Heroin's I agree with you on the other drugs. I do. You do not have to argue with me on that. I'm with you. Heroin is the one where I literally have never heard that. Until Carl Hart was saying oh yeah, I huff it once every night or whatever he says. That was the first time I ever heard that. Anyone I've ever known who got into heroin, it ruined their life or they died.
I'll be honest, it surprised me. I know people, it didn't surprise me as much when I started seeing people say, hey, I broke my leg a year ago, still got a big old bottle of Percocet, and they still have it a year later because, hey, it's New Year's, I'm going to take a Perc. Yeah. Or, hey, whatever, that's most people's drug use. It is not all day, every day, like the prescriptions that get you. And that's how the addiction starts. If you use it, once in a while, if you go out every Friday night and have a beer, you're probably never going to get addicted. You know what? If you take an opiate every Friday night, the odds of addiction are very, 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 very low. The problem with
I got to look into that research more.
I mean, addiction happens because you take a lot of it.
Yes, and you take it regularly.
Right. So
but there's a higher chance. Not this. By the way, there's addiction problems with alcohol for sure.
Right.
But there is. It seems to be, without looking at the numbers in front of me, there is a way higher hit ratio of basic usage leading to reliance when it comes to opiates rather than alcohol.
But one of the big questions becomes, who did that research? And what was their purpose? Because, there was a study that showed that MDMA was like taking a melon baller to the brain, and that's because they altered the pictures.
That's a fair question. It's a very fair question.
And this is one of the problems is when the government alters science for policy, people don't trust the government on policy. The other issue you have is when they do these surveys, how many people are honest? Very few.
Like what specifically? Like what kinds of surveys?
If you do surveys do you use heroin every day?
Oh, right. Yes. That's fair.
The people who do it know it's illegal and a felony. Any amount is a felony and will send you to jail for years. I don't think that's the answer because I don't think anybody.
I agree. That's not the answer at all.
But
Totally agree.
But the flip side to this, so here's the thing: you have three options. Either you can put people in jail.
Bad option.
You can not put people in jail and make it like lettuce, which is decrim.
Okay.
Or you can put it in a structured environment. Like I'll tell you, Rick Doblin has this idea that you should be able to go get a license to do drugs. And that, like a driver's license, and you have to take a class that teaches harm reduction, et cetera, et cetera. And if you have problems or cause issues, you can get a ticket. And if you get too many points, you lose your license to do drugs. Now, I think the problem with that is people are still going to do drugs. But also, something else to think about. How many kids smoke cigarettes right now?
More than they report.
Yes, in part because of vaping. But cigarette use is actually very low. You look at cannabis use amongst children in states where it's legal, and it's actually gone down. Now, part of this is because they can't access it. My kid can go buy, a 12-year-old can go get heroin. It was easier for my kid in South Carolina to find weed than cigarettes.
Because they didn't have it in a lot of stores?
No, because no store would sell it to them.
Oh, right. Because he was underage, you're saying.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
So when he was in middle school, it was easier for him.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Way easier. Yes. Agreed.
And that's because it's illegal. So I understand the negative that you talk about, but also the positives and the other things involved far outweigh that. And here's the other thing: one, if I'm wrong, we can entirely pull it back. I think we should explore it. I think that part of the problem is the push for decriminalization doesn't have regulation. It doesn't do anything to fix the problems that are the justification for legalization.
Where it's coming from, what's in it, yes.
And, I mean, we can go bigger. I mean, the national security implications of the drug war are enormous.
Huge. Agreed.
I mean, think about this. Why do you think the cartels kill people? Because they can't go to court to enforce their territory.
Right.
If you turn them into pharmaceutical companies,
they got to use court.
They stop, like the Sacklers and Pablo Escobar. Yeah, Pablo Escobar, bad dude, blew up and killed a lot of people.
Sacklers are every bit as bad. They just didn't have the courage to look at it.
No. The Sacklers didn't have to. Because they had the courts and they had the police doing their bidding. So, if it becomes legal, what's the number one source of funding for terrorism?
I'm gonna guess drugs. Because I know they were like
other than state sponsor, it's narcotics trafficking.
Yeah, like what's it called? Hezbollah, one of the biggest coke dealers in the world. They send it through like used cars up and around the world through Africa and Mexico and like a cycle to get it to the U.S.
Contraband, black market economies is what supports all the bad things.
Yes.
So if you take the most lucrative thing out of the black market, the funding for that dries up.
Just like how they started, by the way, though, this is the problem. It all comes back to the capitalism buy-off system. You notice the weed conversation of getting it massively like legalized, decriminalized, all that stuff. And let's go to like production to get it produced. That started when companies like Constellation Brands and Anheuser-Busch, if I'm getting some of the companies wrong, but like the point being, when the alcohol companies started taking their own positions and buying up giant weed fields, because now what did they do? They sent all their lobbyists who have relationships and bought off all these politicians to D.C. and said, oh, by the way, now we're in the business. So all that shit, what do you mean?
They didn't go to D.C. They went to the states and changed the laws. DC hasn't changed weed laws.
No. Same problem here because now they're working on DC. I'm talking about the same thing. Yeah. But the bottom line is all the politics that they bought off, they're now now they're starting to argue for that because now they actually can control that business as opposed to in the past, they loved that weed was illegal because they wanted alcohol to be the thing that you could go and get very easily.
Yep. And
it's money. It's politics. It's power.
But here's the other thing. Nothing about them getting involved says that the other things can't happen. And what I mean by this is, yes, you're right. But you know what? Anheuser-Busch is not the only beer you can buy. I mean, dude, walk into like Whole Foods and there's what, like 9,000 different kinds of IPAs? Right,
but they're not as big as companies. That's the point. I'm saying the biggest companies, the ones that run it, the ones that are at the top of the chain, they're the ones who went. They're the ones going in and buying up weed now. They're buying up in Canada all this stuff, and they're like, okay, well now we're on it, so now it can be legal.
But the thing is, so like when it comes to cannabis, I've always said this: you're gonna have your Swanson's TV dinner bought at Walmart, and you're gonna have your GMO-free, organic, gluten-free variety from the farmer's market, just like we have food. But also cannabis versus drugs that have much greater potentials for abuse do need to be treated differently. Like cannabis should entirely be like booze, like everywhere.
Yeah,
but
agreed.
Part of the problem we have is, and honestly, the reason that the States Act didn't pass is because the Democrats insisted that no, it be legal in all states or not. Which is so weird because the answer there is what they're literally saying is we fully believe that people should continue to be incarcerated for this unless we get what we want. I mean, it's the same thing when it comes to criminal justice reform. I'll take what I can get. If I can get 20% of the people who I believe shouldn't be in prison out of prison, I will absolutely do it tomorrow. I'm not going to say, no, it's all or nothing because at least that 20% gets out. And you know what? It's a shitty thing that other 80% is there. But, I'll take 20 and then I'll fight for another 20. I'll always fight for everything, but I'm not going to say no because of partisanship. I'm not going to say, I work with Dan Crenshaw and AOC's offices. Like literally.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I was actually one of the people who got Matt Gaetz to co-sponsor AOC's bill.
Wow.
Because her office called and said, we need a Republican. I'm like, let me see what I can do.
Go get Gates.
No, I'm like, let me see what I can do. And I hung up the phone. I'm like, who the fuck am I going to get to work with AOC on the right? I'm like, oh, I know who. And part of it's because Matt Gaetz doesn't care on stuff like this. He'll work with the left. And this was also well before.
This is 2019, right?
2019.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't be the same today.
No. Yeah, it's entirely different today. But in 2019. But he was still Matt Gaetz back then.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I will, I go talk to Trump. I go talk to Biden. I will literally go talk to anybody about this issue because those are the people who have access and have the ability to make those changes. And, it's also funny because it gets super complex once you get into it because it seems easy. It's like, well, this helps heal PTSD. So let people use it. We're done. And it gets way more complicated. I mean, we see like banking and cannabis and all these other things. Like it gets far more complicated than people think it is. But, I just blanked.
Well, you said enough there because the point is like, we need guys like you who are willing to work on both sides and just get it done however it can be done. And also, someone like you who has been through it and has seen such a change in their life, telling their story. I mean, like I said, the documentary feature with Michael Pollan on how to change your mind on Netflix, your segment and all the segments in that episode and really all the episodes I watch were incredibly compelling.
Lori, the woman was fantastic. And there was so much. One of the things I love that she said is, I thought that was only for veterans. PTSD affects everyone. And I have a lot of people who reach out to me because they see me in media and stuff like that. And I try to help every person who contacts me. Sadly, like at some point I'm going to be able to say, oh, you'd like MDMA assisted therapy? Here's your nearest clinic. Right now, I'm like, gotta wait. But I'll set people up with therapists and like all this stuff to try and help them. But I had somebody and they were like, well, they knew they had PTSD, but they wouldn't say it. I said, we don't have to call it PTSD. We can call it purple hippo if you want. Like, and the issue was she thought it was just for veterans and that somehow people going into combat experience worse than her. And I've heard, you look at Lori Tipton's story, and that's the woman in the episode with me on How to Change Your Mind.
It was episode 3.
Yeah. And she survived Katrina. Then she was raped, had to have an abortion after the rape, and then walked in after her mother killed 2 people and committed suicide.
Found the whole thing.
Yeah. Guess what? That's way worse.
Yeah, she had it.
Than a lot of people. And this is where, like, and even she thought, no, that's just for soldiers. And this is where, yes, on psychedelics and on a lot of issues involving mental health, veterans have taken the charge and taken the lead. In part because this is not easy work. It's very emotionally demanding, especially when you have people who are suffering and there's not a lot you can do to help them. Or you have people call up and they mean this in the absolute best way possible, but they're like, I wish my brother who committed suicide 4 years ago had what you had. And things like that. So it does absolutely take an emotional toll. But part of the reason veterans do it is because our trauma is socially acceptable. I get why, before this, we were talking about, there's things that are in my therapy tapes and that I've dealt with in my life that I have no issues one-on-one talking with you about, but I'm not going to put it in media. Over half, I believe, of the participants in the MAP study were sexual assault victims. But I also get why a woman who's raped doesn't want to go on Netflix and that in part because people in her life, people in her family may not know. What if it was a family member? But I can come on a show and say, hey, I was in the Army. I served in Iraq. I came back with PTSD. And people go, oh, okay, that makes complete sense. You have somebody like, for example, a rape victim. Okay, well, let's see. Was she really raped? What was she wearing? There's shame and stigma associated with it, both internally and societally. And that's why, and then you have people who, may have very severe PTSD because they were in a car accident. And they're like, I was just in a car accident. People get in car accidents all the time. But veterans, our trauma is socially acceptable. And I believe that gives us an obligation that obligates veterans to actually speak up.
Wow.
Because we can.
Well, you're doing it. And I really enjoyed this today. I learned a lot too. I think people out there will as well. And where can people find you online? Like, is Twitter your best spot or?
Twitter at Jon Lubecky. Search for Sergeant Psychedelic on Instagram, or Jonathan Lubecky or Sergeant Psychedelic on Facebook.
And then what were those other 2 documentaries besides How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan that you're also in?
Goop Labs with Gwyneth Paltrow. There was The Healing Trip is the name of the episode.
Oh, is that on Netflix too?
It should still be on Netflix.
Okay, cool.
And then The Business of Drugs, which is still on Netflix. Yep. It's an episode called Synthetics, the last 13 minutes. And the reason I say the last 13 minutes is because the first part, they start talking about spice and K2, the synthetic cannabis stuff. Which is really kind of weird how they filmed it and all that. So yeah, if you go to like the last 13, 14 minutes, you'll see me in uniform at the New York City Veterans Day Parade.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming up here. I really
thanks for having me on
it. And I would love to hear how things are looking a year or 2 from now.
Absolutely.
Some of the legislation. Everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace.